Chapter 1491 Northern Camp. As the transmission array fiercely surged with strength, space twisted and figures appeared. As they looked around, their complexions changed. Northern Camp. How come we're here? Could it be that what we're about to do is related to the Northeast Desolate region? Qin Yu frowned as he heard the discussions around him. That woman had clearly said that it was related to the Western Desolate Imperial Tomb. Regarding this, she shouldn't be deceiving them. Did something change? Silence. A cold voice sounded out. Standing in front of everyone was an armored general. His eyes were like an eagle's, emitting a chilling intent. After the surroundings quietened down, the general coldly said, "Everyone, there is no need to panic. Since you came from the imperial capital, your first stop is indeed the northern camp. You will stay here for a day and obtain information about your next mission." Everyone relaxed, and a bit of excitement appeared in their eyes. They finally had the qualifications to obtain information about their next mission. In fact, although the Imperial Palace did an excellent job of keeping information confidential, everyone was already thinking about it. This mission was bound to involve a great deal. The opening of the Tang Mountain fantasy realm was the best proof. Danger was necessary, but in this world, input and output were ultimately proportional. The higher the risk of the mission, the more merit points they could accumulate. After leaving the large tent, everyone was gathered together. The one who came to announce the contents of the mission was actually Grandma Wu from the Imperial Palace. Qin Yu's eyes narrowed. It seemed that this seemingly ordinary old woman had a far higher status in the Western, desolate Imperial Palace than he imagined. Everyone has seen this old woman before, so let's get straight to the point. Your mission is to enter the depths of the Western Desolate Empire and seize a treasure for my Western Desolate. What followed was roughly the same as what the Lord Ruler had said. It was just that the specific details were concealed. For instance, information about the Western Desolate Imperial Tomb. For instance, the level of the treasure. In this aspect, the Lord Ruler knew a bit about it. Qin Yu didn't believe that the Western Desolate wouldn't have any harvests. The concealment now only showed that they knew more, but they weren't willing to tell everyone. They clearly needed to rely on everyone to seize the treasure from the Western Desolate Imperial Tomb. But they chose to conceal key information. No matter how one looked at it, this was an extremely stupid decision. Was this the wisdom of the Western Desolate Imperial clan? After leaving the tent, they had a day to rest. The ultra-long distance teleportation formation was also a burden for cultivators. Although 2 consecutive teleportations would not cause too much damage, they were about to go to the Western Barbarian territory, so they naturally had to keep themselves in peak condition. The next day, everyone was gathered together, and they would directly enter the Western Garrison camp through the transportation formation between the 4 great border armies. Very soon, they discovered that apart from yesterday's companions, there were new faces joining them. It wasn't appropriate to say that they were new faces, because they knew most of them, and their names were like thunder to their ears. General Yi Qin, General Yi Xiling. The 2 Imperial Guard generals are actually participating in this as well. And Sect Master Knight Demon. Apart from these 3 whose names were called out, there were 2 others that no one recognized. However, those who could stand side by side with them were naturally experts of the same level. 5 hegemons. No, it would be more accurate to say that he was an absolute expert who stood at the peak of the ruler level. Qin Yu looked at the 5 hegemons in front of him and suddenly realized that this was a normal situation. After all, the treasures in the Western Barbarian Imperial Tomb had a high probability of helping a peak hegemon to complete the transformation and ascend to the half-emperor level. Once they succeeded, it was the best choice to use it immediately. Did they have to bring it all the way back to the Western wilderness and then distribute it? After all, a long night was fraught with trouble. Moreover, the Western barbarians were not easy to deal with, and once an accident occurred in the Imperial Tomb, it would inevitably be discovered. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu smiled bitterly under the black robe. He already felt that the task was difficult, but now there were 5 mountains pressing down on him. Disregarding everything else, Qin Yu didn't have the confidence to deal with any one of the 5 sovereign realm masters. To smoothly obtain the barbarian treasure under their noses and complete the task given by His Excellency ruler, no matter how he looked at it, the chances were slim. If he was not careful and revealed any abnormalities, he might even be killed on the spot. His thoughts raced. Qin Yu thought of the doubts that had been in his heart before. Since the Western wilderness knew the secret of the Western barbarian imperial tomb, sending super powerhouses to seize it was of course the best choice. Even if the Western barbarians were tyrannical, since they had been suppressed for many years, it meant that they were at a disadvantage in terms of peak combat strength, that is, the Emperor realm. If they gathered a group of top powerhouses to seize it, the chances of success were extremely high, and an opportunity that could cultivate a half-emperor was worth a lot of trouble. The Western wilderness did not choose to do this. Qin Yu did not know the specific reason, but he guessed that there was some kind of restriction, or that the imperial tomb itself had a strong restriction, so they could only send a group of saints. But now it seemed that things were not so simple. The existence of the 5 hegemons in front of him meant that hegemons could enter the imperial tomb. Then why did a group of saints need to take action? After all, no matter how powerful a saint was, they were far from being comparable to a hegemon. Even Qin Yu, an abnormal existence among the saints, might be able to fight a hegemon with all his strength, but he still did not have the confidence to deal with any one of the 5 hegemons in front of him, because each of them was a peerless powerhouse among hegemons. With the Western wilderness's heritage, not to mention the 5 in front of him, as long as they wanted to, they could even pull out a team of hegemons to attack. Why was that? Qin Yu's thoughts raced. Because the information he knew was limited, he couldn't find any explanation. But deep in his heart, a great restlessness surged out. He felt that there was a great problem here. Suddenly, Qin Yu thought back to yesterday, when Mother Wu had given him the mission information. She had deliberately left out some key points. Could it be that the Western wilderness had another plan? Everyone, there is no need to think too much about it. The reason the 5 hegemons are following us is to deal with any possible threat from the Western wilderness. As for seizing the treasure, we will need your help. This matter is of great importance. As long as we can smoothly seize the treasure, everyone will have merit. His Majesty will not be stingy with rewards. The Northern Camp's commanding general, Zhou Wu, said in a deep voice, "I wish you all a smooth return." Yi Qin, Yi Xiling, and the others bowed. Everyone followed suit. Even Blood Flag, with his wild and unruly temperament, didn't dare to show any disrespect. Zhou Wu was the commanding general of the Northern Camp. He was one of the 5 great generals of the Western wilderness and could be considered a super leader of the military. His disciples were spread throughout the military, and he was deeply trusted by His Majesty the Desolate Emperor. "Let's go." With Zhou Wu's order, everyone stepped into the transmission array. With a loud humming sound, space twisted and swallowed up everyone. Where there were people, there were transactions. No matter what it was, no matter what goods were traded, they were destined to exist. The Western wilderness had suppressed the Western wilderness for many years, and the war between the 2 sides had continued for tens of thousands of years. It was unknown just how much blood had stained their hands. To say that this was a blood feud that could not be resolved for generations wasn't an exaggeration. Even so, beneath the surface of the bloody slaughter between the 2 sides, in the shadows where the light couldn't shine, there was still a trade. The Western wilderness hoped to obtain all sorts of luxuries and enjoyments from the Western wilderness, and the Western wilderness wanted to obtain the treasures that were unique to the Western wilderness. For instance, in the Western wilderness, there was a monster beast called Cruel. After it was tamed and raised by the Western wilderness, it became their main source of meat. Cruel itself didn't have much use, but when its feces fell on some special weeds within the Western wilderness, there was a chance that it would undergo a mutation and give birth to something called rainbow grass. The Western wilderness used this rainbow grass to create a terrifying fog. It was enough to confuse the minds of the bravest and most brutal warriors of the Western wilderness. It was an invincible weapon on the battlefield. As for the rainbow grass, the Western wilderness had made countless attempts. They took the initiative to wage war against the Western wilderness, plundering a large number of cruel to breed and breed. In the newly conquered Western wilderness territory, they attempted to artificially produce it. But unfortunately, all of these attempts ended in failure, not only because the probability of the rainbow grass being produced was extremely low, but also because the cruel that were bred and bred would soon go berserk. It seemed that after leaving the Western wilderness, their tamed wild nature would quickly return. This was just one example. Although the Western wilderness was a barren land filled with cruelty, blood, and slaughter in the eyes of the Western wilderness, in reality it was a treasure trove. And all of this spurred the birth of transactions between the two sides. The higher-ups of both sides were aware of this, but at the same time turned a blind eye to it. In times of war, they would even take the initiative to avoid the location of the transaction. And today, under the shroud of the deep night, not far from the camp of the Western Frontier Army, there was a large-scale transaction going on. In the mountain hollow, surrounded by steep stone walls, there was still the howling of the wind, like the desperate roar of a dying person. It made people's hearts tremble, and then their hair stood on end. There were many people on both sides, including many sovereign realm experts. They tried hard to suppress their aura, not letting it leak out at all. After all, although the transaction was a semi-open secret, it was still necessary to cover it up on the surface. But their eyes were still full of vigilance and threat, constantly paying attention to the surrounding changes, to ensure that they would not be ambushed. Under the cover of the howling of the wind, all the sounds in the mountain hollow were covered up. Both sides were obviously old acquaintances. Although there were many items, they quickly completed all kinds of verification, smiling and nodding to each other to express their satisfaction. In the mountain hollow, the people in charge of guarding were now slightly relieved. Unsurprisingly, today would be another win-win cooperation. Soon, everyone would take what they needed and go their separate ways. But at this moment, one of the people in the Western Wilderness trading team suddenly attacked, and blood gushed out like a fountain. The leader, who was still smiling just a moment ago, was beheaded. The mountain hollow instantly fell into a deathly silence. After beheading the Western Wilderness, the saber wielder stomped his feet and his figure shot forwards like a bolt of lightning. He shouted out in the language of the barbarians, his voice filled with excitement. Although the Western Wilderness people participating in the transaction weren't proficient in the language of the barbarians, most of them could understand some of it. Mission, plan attack, don't let a single one escape. These barbarians, they actually dared to play dirty. Attack, kill them all. Thunderous shouts erupted. The Western Wilderness people reacted with the idea of striking first to gain the upper hand. They roared and rushed forwards. On the other hand, the Western Wilderness people were a step too slow after killing the barbarians and suffered heavy losses. They angrily roared as if they wanted to explain, but the smell of blood had already spread through the air, so there was no way to ease the situation. Soon, the mountain hollow turned into a mass of minced porridge. Bang, bang! At almost the same time, a bright and dazzling signal firework shot into the sky, exploding in the air. It was scarlet red, like two blooming flowers that had eaten their fill of blood. Woo! Woo! A bugle horn sounded in the army. The border army camp that guarded the western border and the barbarian front line soon became lively. At this time, soldiers surged forwards like a raging tide. Jiangqing Zi stood atop the city walls, his hands resting on an icy cold rock. His eyes were even colder as he looked at the vast and dark wilderness. Behind him, a deputy general revealed a pained expression. He cupped his hands together and said, "General, those people in the mountain hollow are still the people of my western wilderness. Should we order the troops to turn around and rescue them?" Jiangqing Zi shook his head. As the corpse eaters of the empire, to be able to contribute their lives to the empire is the best ending for them. After he finished speaking, he paused for a moment and gently waved his hand. The deputy general's expression suddenly changed. With a low roar, his figure exploded. But before he could fly into the air, a resplendent saber light whistled through the air. With a putong sound, the deputy general's body fell to the ground and was split into two. Hot blood splashed onto Jiangqing Zi's armor. His complexion didn't change at all. He coldly said, "Drag him away." After another moment, a soldier hurried over and whispered a few words in his ear. Jiangqing Zi nodded and waved his hand. The Western barbarians have broken the agreement and brazenly attacked the western border camp at night. Pass down the order for the army to press forward. Only when 100,000 Western barbarians have been beheaded will they withdraw. Chapter 1492. In the last 1,000 years, the fiercest war between the Western wilderness and the Western barbarians had erupted without warning. Unlike the past years of retreat and avoidance, the weakened Western barbarians had actually chosen to fight to the death. They were ferocious to the extreme. There were rumors that this was because in the transaction known as the Fuse, a noble figure of the Western barbarians had been assassinated by the Western wilderness using shameless and despicable methods. This caused the great tribes to unite against a common enemy, and they were determined to make the Western wilderness pay a painful price. The tip of the weapons were like tidewater that opposed each other with equal harshness, and they ferociously fought each other. There were even countless experts mixed within them, and they emanated a world-shaking aura that stirred up the origin energy in the heavens and the earth, causing the sky to dim, the heavens and the earth to be cast into a shade, and all the vital energy was covered and concealed. Just when the battle was in full swing and countless lives were being lost at every moment, 5 troops that were hidden in the Western Desert's army quietly left the main battlefield and brazenly tore open a gap in the Berserkers' defense camp. Before the Berserkers could react, they plunged into the depths of the Western barbarians' territory. They were like fish swimming into the sea. Their tails rapidly swayed as they soon disappeared from everyone's line of sight. The 5 squads were each led by a peak sovereign powerhouse. The leader of Qin Yu's squad was the old Yi family's General Yi Qin. The group of people ran forward in silence, trying their best to conceal their auras. Because they were too fast, they left behind afterimages. They were like shadows that swept across the ground, quietly moving forward. Qin Yu fell at the end of the squad. Beneath his black robes, he frowned. He swept his eyes over the people in front of him, worry in his eyes. As he thought, the Western Wilderness plan wasn't as simple as it seemed. In order to avoid being discovered by the Western barbarians, it was possible to divide the squad into 5 groups. But the problem was that the 5 squads were all moving in different directions. There was clearly something wrong with this. Qin Yu didn't believe that His Majesty the ancient barbarian sovereign would build 5 scattered tombs for himself. No one was a fool, much less the cultivators that had been selected to participate in this mission. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were the best of the best. There was a problem. They dared to use their knees to guarantee that there was definitely a problem. However, as mentioned before, they were all smart people, so even if they sensed it, no one showed the slightest hint of abnormality. Now, they had already left the camp of the western frontier and had entered deep into the territory of the Berserkers. Forget about everything else. Just Yi Qin alone had the ability to make all doubts about them disappear. The territory of the Western barbarians was vast and sparsely populated. Most of the land was barren, and the strong wind blew sand and gravel all over the sky. Naturally, it was a form of protection that was beneficial to the group. In addition, the front line was in a tight situation. A large number of Western barbarian soldiers had been sent to the front line. The level of internal defense and patrol had been weakened to the lowest level. with Yi Qin covering everyone's breath. The process of breaking into the depths of the Western savages was extremely smooth. Even though there were a few times when they passed by some tribes, they didn't cause any trouble. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu was secretly observing General Yi Qin, who was leading the way. He was very sure that if Yi Qin wanted to, he could easily avoid these Western barbarian tribes scattered on the ground. The reason why there were these seemingly dangerous brushing past was because he had done so intentionally. Perhaps he was looking for something. This was a bit different from what Qin Yu thought before. He felt that this matter was increasingly strange. On the 5th day of entering deep into the Western savages' territory, after observing dozens of tribes of different sizes, Yi Qin finally found a satisfactory target. He stood in the yellow grass and pointed a finger forward. Attack! Within a quarter hour, I want there to be no living being in this tribe. Everyone bowed. No one asked why, nor did they make things difficult for him. Between the Western wilderness and the berserkers, there was a blood feud that would never end until one side was dead. The slaughter began. A group of saints attacked. As for the barbarian tribe in front of them, it wasn't too large. This meant that it was weak. When the two were put together, there was no need to mention the result. Beneath the black robes, Qin Yu saw countless streams of blood flow. There were old and wrinkled barbarian women, and there were scimitar-wielding youths. But without exception, even as they died, their eyes were filled with hatred. There was no fear, and no one begged for mercy. The great elder of this barbarian tribe was a saint. Before he died, he tried to send a message to the outside world. But as soon as the bloodlight left his body, it shattered with a muffled sound and was annihilated. Yi Qin flicked his sleeves, and the great elder's body was thrown far away like a ragged sack. He fell to the ground, no longer breathing. Who? Between heaven and earth, the sound of the wind became increasingly shrill. The thick smell of blood drilled into everyone's nostrils and mouths. The entire barbarian tribe fell into absolute silence. There was only death. There was no sign of life. Yes, even the cruel that was raised as meat for the barbarian tribe had been completely killed. This was because General Yi Qin's order was to kill all living beings in the barbarian tribe. After stepping into the great elder's tent and breaking the seal, Yi Qin quickly found the entrance to the underground. The moment the entrance was opened, a blood-red skull flew out at an astonishing speed, heading straight for the entrance. Humph! Yi Qin stomped on the ground, and the skull that was pouncing towards him let out a blood-curdling screech as it was directly shattered. He was the first to enter the passage. Everyone followed behind him, all the way down to a simple underground altar that had been dug out. It was a very simple and crude stone platform with obvious traces of man-made excavation. A black stone statue was placed on top of it. From its appearance, one could only tell that it was a tall and sturdy barbarian warrior. Apart from that, one couldn't tell anything about its appearance. But at this moment, Qin Yu's heart chilled. He could feel a formidable suppression coming from this rough stone statue. This didn't mean that it possessed a formidable strength, but rather that it was a suppression on a different level. This was similar to the difference in the food chain. And what gave Qin Yu this awe-inspiring feeling came from the connection between him and the divine kingdom. If Qin Yu didn't know the details of the Western savage imperial tomb and the function of the barbarian race's supreme treasure, he clearly wouldn't have connected the two together. But now, as his thoughts turned, a sharp light exploded in his eyes. This stone statue was the powerful sovereign of the Western savage empire. With this knowledge, everything could be explained. For instance, why Yi Qin had led everyone to brush past the barbarian tribes again and again. What he was looking for was the barbarian tribes that still believed in the dead sovereign. This was definitely related to the imperial tomb. And what happened next undoubtedly further verified Qin Yu's speculations. Yi Qin stepped onto the altar. He took out something from his chest and opened it with his back facing everyone. His fingers sank into it, and a deep red appeared between the stone statue's eyebrows. Rumble, rumble. A deep and oppressive rumbling sounded out from within the stone statue, like the greedy roars of a starving tiger or wolf. Deep red bloodlines drilled out from between the stone statue's eyebrows and rapidly spread outwards. After several breaths of time, they covered the entire body. Then they sank into the altar. The increasingly loud rumbling sounds came from within the stone statue. Strong winds howled. Countless barbarian corpses fell to the ground. The barbarian corpses that dyed the entire barbarian tribe, red began to wither at a speed visible to the naked eye. At this moment, it was like an invisible demon had drilled its way out and stabbed its mouth into their bodies, crazily plundering their flesh and blood. In a short period of time, all of the barbarian corpses had turned into dry wood. All that was left over was a layer of deep purple skin that had lost all moisture and was stuck to the surface of the skeleton. All of their flesh and blood had disappeared. Even the blood that had spilled onto the ground had been completely stripped away. The thick smell of blood that filled the air of the barbarian tribe and couldn't be dispelled by the strong winds had now completely disappeared. Underground altar space, incomparably thick and viscous flesh and blood gathered along the bloodlines, submerging the entire altar and forming a giant mass of flesh and blood. The surface of the mass of flesh and blood constantly wriggled as if it were a living creature. It also seemed as if there was some terrifying creature hidden within that could drill out at any moment. However, everyone knew very well that there was only that extremely crude stone statue inside the ball of blood. Yi Qin had a solemn expression as he stared at the mass of flesh and blood. After a long time, he seemed to confirm something, and his complexion relaxed. He let out a long breath. The first step could be considered to have been completed. He sensed with rapt attention. After determining that there wasn't anything wrong, he turned to everyone and calmly said, "I know that there are many things in your hearts that you must be puzzled about. But regarding this matter, there are some things that you have no right to touch upon. Now I will issue a new mission." Yi Qin's eyes swept over everyone. After pausing on Qinyu for a moment, he said in a low voice, "Next, we will use the method of drawing lots. 3 of you will follow me and leave. The rest of you will have to stay here and ensure that this place is not destroyed. Remember, you absolutely cannot make any mistakes. Even if you have to pay with your lives, you must protect the altar and maintain its original state. Otherwise, even if you can leave this place alive, you will be banished forever, and it will be impossible for you to return to the Western Wasteland." Everyone's hearts chilled. They could feel the icy cold and powerful will exuding from his eyes. They all lowered their heads and nodded. "Very good," Yi Qin said. "You can rest assured that the Western Wasteland will remember everyone's contributions. As long as this matter is smoothly accomplished, everyone will be richly rewarded. And this matter itself isn't too dangerous. As long as there are no accidents in 3 to 5 days, it will be fine." 3 to 5 days? Many people revealed looks of joy. Their team of cultivators had 9 people. In other words, most of them would stay here and be responsible for guarding the altar that was wrapped in flesh and blood. The Western savages were sparsely populated. In addition, they were in a period of war, and the various tribes didn't have time to spare. As long as their luck was good, it wouldn't be difficult to hold out for 3 to 5 days. Beneath the black robes, Qinyu frowned. He stared at the flesh and blood wrapped around the altar. Although he didn't know what this meant, his intuition told him that there was a great deal of danger here. If they stayed here, it wouldn't be as simple as Yi Qin said. The process of drawing lots was simple. Yi Qin condensed 9 balls of light, and everyone chose one. The one with the red inside stayed behind. Qinyu turned red. His eyes swept over the 3 people chosen by Yi Qin. Beneath the black robes, Qinyu frowned and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The reason he said they were chosen by him was because this method of drawing lots was simply ridiculous. Yi Qin's ball of light, with just a thought, he could turn the inside of it scarlet red. Do you believe it? If he really believed the so-called integrity and fairness of the Imperial City's Guard Division's commander, that would be a joke. Qin Yu was well aware that if he could see it, others would be able to guess it as well. But just like before, when they entered the Western savages and sensed that something was wrong, everyone remained silent. The underground sacrificial altar was still quiet. No one objected. Yi Qin said, "Very good. The three of you prepare yourselves. We will leave tomorrow." He turned and left. He didn't know whether it was good luck or bad, but Blood Flag and Yi Wangu weren't in Qin Yu's team. Thus, the three people chosen by Yi Qin were unfamiliar faces to Qin Yu. Of course, because of the confirmation of the Imperial Palace, although he didn't know them, he had a deep understanding of them. It wasn't too much to say that they had an extremely deep understanding. It was also because of this that Qin Yu had more room to manipulate them. Of course, the truth was that Qin Yu didn't think things would reach this step. It was impossible for him to stay here. Not to mention the danger he felt from his intuition. Even the Lord Ruler's mission didn't allow Qin Yu to stay here. What should he do? Qin Yu's thoughts raced, and the outline of a plan gradually took shape. The next day, the Lord Ruler led the three people away. Their figures quickly went far away and finally disappeared from sight. The 6 people who stayed behind finally didn't need to hide their true thoughts anymore. Their faces were all gloomy. "It seems that you and I have been excluded from the true core of the mission from the beginning," a saint of the Western Wilderness said through gritted teeth. "It's meaningless to talk about this now. The will of General Yi Qin isn't something you and I can resist. Moreover, today's arrangement is likely to come from a higher level. Now, I only hope that everything is as General Yi Qin said. You and I can stay safe for 3 to 5 days, and then we can return to the Western Wilderness smoothly. In this way, although we won't have the chance to get the first merit, we will still be rewarded." As they talked, their eyes swept over the silent Qin Yu under the black robe. Most of them had a strange look on their faces. The reason was very simple. The origin of the Dark Ruler was no longer a secret. He was the 6th prince, Li Yizhou's only remaining hope. Now, this hope was obviously shattered. Being excluded from the core of the plan, there was naturally no chance to help Li Yizhou turn things around. Thinking about it, even if he could return to the imperial capital smoothly, the Dark Ruler wouldn't have a good ending. Not to mention that madman Blood Flag. Just those open spears and hidden arrows that hit him while he was down were enough to tear him to pieces. Qin, you could feel the meaning in these eyes. But under the black robe, his expression was still calm. There was no ripple in his eyes. After confirming the division of labor, everyone dispersed. Half a day later, it was Qin Yu's turn to patrol the tribe. He calmly walked out of the underground altar and walked straight ahead, soon disappearing into the vast wilderness, acting without permission and leaving the tribe. This was something that the saints of the Western Wilderness thought about but didn't dare to do. But Qin Yu didn't have any scruples. The identity of the Dark Ruler was fake. It was just a pass for him to smoothly enter the Western Wilderness. If there was a need, he could change into another person at any time and obtain a new identity. After confirming that the Dark Ruler was nowhere to be found, the saints of the Western Wilderness were shocked and angry. Qin Yu went all the way north, whistling as he locked onto his target. His expression was calm, and his eyes were steady and bright. Chapter 1493. Yi Qin stopped. Under the surprised gazes of the 3 saints, he took out a jade archive. His eyes lit up as he probed it with his divine sense. His lips curled into a cold smile. The Dark Ruler had left his post, and his whereabouts were unknown. As expected, he couldn't just sit back and wait for death. Before leaving the imperial capital, someone had personally visited him and asked Yi Qin to kill the Dark Ruler. He had offered a tempting reward. It was indeed very tempting. Even with Yi Qin's firm will, he couldn't help but waver. But after thinking about it, he finally chose to refuse. As the saying goes, a centipede dies but never falls down. Li'Ijo was the sixth prince of the Western Wilderness, and he had the influence of the previous desolate emperor. It would be extremely foolish to treat him like a turtle in a jar without any ability to retaliate. But not taking the initiative didn't mean that Yi Qin couldn't force the Dark Ruler to die. Just like now, he had achieved his goal. Now that the Dark Ruler had left without permission, he could only be a rat in the sewers for the rest of his life if he fled. If he was unwilling and tried to change the situation, as long as he dared to show up, Yi Qin would be the first to kill him. With a strong enough position and motive, he wouldn't be afraid of revenge. In other words, no matter what, Li'Ijo was doomed to fall. There would be no chance for him to make a comeback. Once he achieved this goal, someone would give him a reward when he returned to the imperial capital. As for whether the Dark Ruler would become hot-headed and join the barbarians, once he entered the illusion of Mount Tang, he had completely cut off the possibility of joining the barbarians. Otherwise, why would the imperial palace be so generous? There was a price to pay for everything in this world. General Yi Qin, a saint from the West Wilderness, asked respectfully. Yi Qin waved his hand. "It's nothing. Let's continue our journey." He waved his sleeves, and energy wrapped around the three of them. They continued their journey towards the northern region of the Western Wilderness. For someone like Yi Qin, who had reached the peak of the sovereign realm and was qualified to break through to the emperor realm, a mere sovereign of darkness at the sage realm was no more than a strong ant. If he wanted to, he could squash it with a single finger. Of course it didn't matter. The sixth prince was completely thrown into the abyss. Next, it would depend on who would have the last laugh and get that treasure. Endless heat appeared in the depths of Yi Qin's eyes. Emperor realm. If they were able to step into it, they would be able to reach the peak of the wasteland with a single leap, and they would be able to sweep through everything and look down upon all the kingdoms in the world. No matter where they went, they would be revered and become true, transcendental existences. Not all teams had a smooth journey. The team led by the Night Demon Sect master accidentally exposed their tracks while they were searching for the tribe that worshipped the barbaric emperor. After a great battle, although they had successfully shaken off their pursuers, the powerful warriors of the barbarian tribe who had chased after them had paid the price of the death of two sages. As a result, the plan of the Western Wilderness to take advantage of the outbreak of the war to secretly infiltrate into the depths of the Western barbarians appeared in the eyes of the Western barbarians. When the leader of the Night Demon clan had a gloomy expression on his face, he urgently sent a message to the outside world to inform them of this matter. While he was reorganizing his troops to continue moving, the discussion regarding the abnormal actions of the Western Wilderness had already begun in the strongest tribe of the Western Wilderness, the Dark Knight tribe that had inherited the bloodline of the Man-Emperor. Those who participated in this meeting were the leaders of the major tribes of the Western Savages. They surrounded the round table that was made of cut boulders with solemn expressions. "Leaders, you've all read the intelligence on this matter. You can now express your opinions." The white-haired leader of the Dark Knight tribe, whose face was full of wrinkles, opened his only eye and glanced at the crowd. A cold light flashed in his eyes. The other eye that had been blinded was pierced by a long scar from the tip of his eyebrow to the bridge of his nose, all the way to the corner of his mouth. It formed a protruding, twisted, and extremely hideous scar. The weakest of the cultivators who invaded from the Western Wilderness is a saint, and the leader of the team is a peerless figure of the Dominator realm. Such a powerful warrior would never easily step into the territory of the barbarians. Moreover, they did not escape after being discovered. Instead, they chose to break through the encirclement and go deeper. From this, it can be seen that this group of invaders must be carrying an important mission, a leader of the barbarian tribe said in a low voice. "Our tribe can provide another important piece of information. The barbarians of Western Han, who were discovered by the Western Wilderness cultivators, were originally the descendants of the ancient barbarian kingdom, but they had always hidden their background. We only discovered this secret because of an accident. Ancient barbarian kingdom. Another barbarian tribe leader growled. Killing intent surged in his eyes. Could this matter be related to the opening of the imperial mausoleum? The atmosphere in the big tent suddenly became tense. The barbarian tribe leaders, sitting around the round stone table, all looked shocked and angry. Many things were like this. When nothing was discovered, everything was normal, but once a doubt or a breakthrough point was found, there was no way to continue hiding it. For example, the sudden outbreak of a war at the front line. For many years, the Western wilderness had an absolute advantage and suppressed the Western barbarians, but they had always been relatively restrained. After all, their enemies were not only the Western barbarians, but also the neighboring countries who were eyeing them covetously. Without enough reward or enough motivation, the Western wilderness would not easily start a war, let alone a full-scale slaughter. The Western barbarians took the opportunity to attack. They were forced to take advantage of the situation, and they wanted to use the movement of the war to completely disrupt the chi of heaven and earth and cover up the opening of the imperial mausoleum. But now, it seemed that the Western wilderness had brazenly attacked and accused the Western barbarians of invading. This was their original plan. They also had ideas about the imperial mausoleum. These damn despicable people. In terms of intelligence, the faces of the Western barbarian tribe leaders, who had always been at a disadvantage, became increasingly ugly at this moment. Bastards from the Western wilderness. They actually dared to attack the mausoleum of the great barbarian emperor. Damn it! The legacy of His Majesty the Barbarian Emperor is the only hope for the rise of the Western barbarians. We must not lose it. Great leader of the Dark Knight tribe, please immediately give the order to mobilize the strong barbarians to completely kill the cultivators of the Western wilderness. Angry roars sounded in the big tent like a thunderclap. The one-eyed, old leader of the Dark Knight tribe looked as calm as ever, not the slightest affected by the scene in front of him. He tapped his fingers on the table, and soon his ears became quiet. This was not only because the leader of the Dark Knight tribe was the most powerful cultivator in the entire Western barbarians, but also because of the overall strength of the Dark Knight tribe. Everyone, the opening of the Imperial Mausoleum has been discovered. Even if they send strong cultivators to kill the cultivators of the Western wilderness, who can guarantee that they only sent this team? If we act rashly, I am afraid we will beat the grass and alert the enemy. After a slight pause, the leader of the Dark Knight tribe continued, instead of playing hide-and-seek with them and constantly guarding against a sneak attack from the Western wilderness, it is better to let them in. Without waiting for the crowd to object, a cold light flashed in his single eye, and he said in a cold tone, "The mausoleum of the last barbarian emperor of the barbarians is not a place that anyone can enter. If they dare to enter, only death awaits them. Leader of the Dark Knight tribe, the mausoleum of the barbarian emperor is sacred. Is it inappropriate to do this? Perhaps." The leader of the barbarian tribe had not finished speaking when he let out a muffled groan. His face turned pale, and he looked up in horror. The leader of the Dark Knight tribe leaned forward and pressed his hands on the stone table. He looked down with an imposing manner. "This is my decision. Does anyone have any objections?" The big tent was silent. The leader of the Night Demon sect looked calm as he watched the saints under his command rush into the tribe in front of him and kill, wantonly, to vent the anger and resentment in his heart. Not long ago, their whereabouts were exposed, and they were chased by the strong barbarians. 2 of the saints who came with them were killed on the spot. Even though they did not have much of a relationship with each other, they still felt a chill down their spines, and then resentment grew. But these people did not know that the reason why they were exposed and chased by the strong barbarians was because of the calm leader of the Night Demon sect, who was standing with his hands behind his back. In the Western Wasteland Empire, the Emperor clans were the strongest. There was no doubt about this. Otherwise, the Zhou clan would not have been able to become the country and hold the highest authority in the Western Wasteland. Next was the military. In a world that was not stable, and where wars often broke out, the military must have enough power to speak. This was a matter of course. Even the emperor clans chose to tacitly approve of this. That was why the military of the empire had such an important position today. So this time, the two generals of the Imperial Guard Division came at the same time for the matter of the Western Wastelands Imperial Mausoleum. They directly occupied 2/5 of the quota and opportunities. Next was the administrative system and the local noble clans. They were the system and cornerstone of the Western Wastelands rule. Of course, the reason why they could each get a share was because at the top of the hierarchy were the Emperor realm existences who could speak for their own factions. Last was the sects. The Western Wastelands territory was vast, and there were naturally countless sects of all sizes. They were a force that could not be underestimated. It could even be said that tens of thousands of years ago the power of the sects was so great that even the military couldn't compare. Even the emperor clans needed to give them enough respect. But after a great war, a calamity swept through the world. The two emperor realm experts belonging to the sects both died and their status plummeted. Up until now, they had fallen to the bottom of the ruling class. Even some of the local noble clans did not give the sects any face. It was under this background that the Night Demon Sect Master had painstakingly obtained the last quota and came to the Western Barbarians' territory. And this time, he had used up the sect's many years of accumulation. He could not allow failure. The Night Demon Sect Master was determined to obtain the rare treasure in the barbarian Emperor's tomb. But whether it was the Emperor clans, the military, the administrative system, or the local noble clans, none of them wanted to see the sects rise again. So he had to drag the Western barbarians into the water and make the situation chaotic and dangerous enough. Only then would he have a chance to take advantage of the situation. Of course, there were risks to doing this. If he wasn't careful, he could be surrounded and killed by the barbarian powerhouses. But the Night Demon Sect Master chose to gamble. This was because he was the sect's last hope. If he failed, then perhaps in a few thousand years, or even shorter, the sect would fall from the ruling class and become a chess piece that others could control at will. Luckily, his luck wasn't bad. At least for now, it seemed that his plan had succeeded. The Western barbarians would surely be alerted. The Night Demon Sect Master looked up, his cold eyes looking towards the north. That was where the barbarian emperor's tomb was located. It would also be a terrifying battlefield, and he was confident that he would become the final victor in this slaughter. He didn't know where he was, and he didn't know where he was. But this didn't affect Qin Yu from locking onto the location of the barbarian emperor's tomb. The reason was the divine kingdom. He could faintly feel the fluctuations that were spreading out. They were like the vibrations from the depths of the seabed, setting off a ring-shaped impact. Although it had become incomparably weak by the time it reached the surface, it was still obvious and easy to see. In Qin Yu's understanding, the reason this happened was because the hidden barbarian emperor's tomb was about to appear. That's right, it was hidden. Otherwise, did they really think that the Western barbarians were just a group of people that respected the late emperor and abided by etiquette? If the barbarian emperor's tomb had been exposed before, it would have been completely excavated. There wouldn't have been a chance for the Western wilds to interfere and send them here. Qin Yu rushed forwards alone. In addition to his super strong concealment ability in the dark, his speed was astonishing. He could sense that the fluctuations of aura coming from the barbarian emperor's tomb were constantly approaching. Finally, when the howling winds between the heavens and earth became incomparably strong, so strong that they could easily tear apart the ground and pulverize it into dust, Qin Yu came to a stop. At the end of his line of sight, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the skies. Countless dazzling lights shined down, causing the towering shadow in space to constantly flash and vanish. He had arrived. That was the barbarian emperor's tomb. Qin Yu took a deep breath and resisted the urge to investigate. He stepped forwards, and the ground quietly cracked open. His entire body was wrapped in darkness, submerging into it like a shadow. Not to mention the threat of the Western barbarians. Just the 5 peak rulers that the Western Wild sent here could kill him on the spot. So he couldn't be anxious. All Qin Yu could do now was hide his aura and quietly wait for an opportunity. Chapter 1494. With the arrival of the Western barbarian emperor's mausoleum, the scattered Western barbarians finally gathered together. The Night Demon sect master spoke first, his face heavy and apologetic. I will not shirk my responsibility for this accident. Once this matter is over, I will pay the price. There was silence. This silence was a tacit agreement. It was clear that, at this time, there was no better way to deal with it. At the same time, this silence was a warning and dissatisfaction. The 5 barbarians scattered to prepare for entering the mausoleum. Only the Night Demon sect master's group had a problem. Although accidents could not be controlled by humans, if they really believed that it was an accident, that might not be the case. You and I are in the Western barbarians. No matter what attitude we have, no matter which side we represent, we are all on the same boat. If the boat capsizes, we won't have a good ending. So from now on, please be more careful. The one who spoke was one of the 2 unfamiliar faces. She was an ordinary-looking, middle-aged woman, and her aura was not any stronger than the others. But at this moment, since she spoke and the other rulers remained silent, it meant that she had the qualifications to speak. The reason was simple. This woman's surname was Zhou, or to put it more bluntly, she represented the majesty and power of the emperor clans. The Night Demon sect master had a sad expression. He nodded without speaking. The 3 saints behind him revealed looks of grief and indignation. They wanted to say something, but were interrupted. Yi Qin coughed and said, "Although it is a small matter before entering the mausoleum, I think I should tell you. The dark ruler assigned to me has left his post, and his whereabouts are unknown. Once anyone discovers his whereabouts, they can directly kill him." As he spoke, he glanced at Yi Xiling. Unfortunately, his expression was still cold, and he didn't reveal any abnormalities. No one knew what he was thinking. A mere saint was certainly not worthy of the attention of a peak ruler powerhouse. But the problem was that the Dark Ruler represented 6th Highness Li Yizhou's last hope. Now that he had left his post, it was tantamount to completely cutting off Li Yizhou's hope. For the 5 peak rulers, besides the middle-aged woman representing the Emperor clans, this was probably good news. At least one trivial matter had been solved. Rumble, rumble. It wasn't space that was shattering, but the howling winds that filled the sky were madly tearing the earth apart, creating a shocking disturbance. Above their heads, countless lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The huge shadow of the Western barbarian emperor's tomb in the spatial fault had become clearer and clearer. It gave people the feeling that it was just a little bit away from completely descending. However, in reality, this state had already been maintained for a long time, yet he was still unable to overcome it. In the end, there was only this bit left. The 5 supreme sovereigns raised their heads, and their eyes fell on the shadow of the Western barbarian emperor's mausoleum. At this moment, they understood at the same time. Perhaps this was the final state of the Western barbarian emperor's mausoleum. Even if they waited any longer, it would not completely appear. As for what the reason was, no one knew. But it should be some sort of response from the late Berserker Emperor. Di Ling didn't want to descend completely. There was no point in waiting. The middle-aged woman from the Western Desolation Imperial clan swept her gaze over the 4 people around her. "Everyone, let's go." All right. The 5 sovereigns spread out, leading the 3 sages behind them to take a corner each. Looking down from midair, when everyone's positions were connected together, it formed a standard pentagon. Hum! Hum! As the seals were formed, the 5 sovereigns raised their hands at the same time and touched the space between their eyebrows. The place where their fingertips touched instantly turned crimson red, like concentrated viscous blood. At the same time, a strange and cold aura that revealed ruthlessness, despair, and destruction, yet was also solemn and dignified, erupted from within their bodies. The space was distorted. Deep and coarse phantom lines appeared in the surrounding space. At first, they were thin and weak, but as time passed, they quickly solidified, gradually forming the phantom of a huge stone statue. They were of different sizes and shapes, but the moment one looked at them, one would naturally feel that these stone statues represented the same person. "Come in," the woman from the imperial clan shouted. The 3 sages behind her flashed and entered the phantom of the stone statue. One of them entered the chest, while the other 2 entered the legs. In the next moment, the eyes of the stone statue suddenly lit up, as if it had awakened from a deep slumber. And at the same time, Yi Qin, Yi Xiling, and the other sovereigns also completed the same action. The 5 huge phantom stone statues were resurrected at this moment. Dong, dong. A deep and deep sound spread out from the phantom stone statues, like a strong beating heart. This sound spread out, spreading through space and stirring up layers of fluctuations, like the surface of water being stirred. The 5 phantom stone statues each had 5 hearts beating at the same time. Ripples spread out, colliding with each other, causing the entire situation to become chaotic. But in this chaos, there was a faint, mysterious flavor to it. At this moment, if someone were to see the spatial oscillation between the 5 stone statues and the spatial distortion caused by the descent of the Western barbarian emperor's tomb in the spatial fault above their heads, they would find that the 2 chaotic fluctuations were highly overlapping. And as time passed, they gradually approached each other, gradually becoming completely synchronized. Dong, dong. The heartbeat became faster and faster, and the chaos became increasingly intense. When it reached a certain limit, schwa, the 5 phantom stone statues, as well as the people within them, all vanished from sight. Deep underground, hidden in the darkness, with the sun and moon force field wrapping around him, Qin Yu was able to see everything from a transcendent perspective. A look of surprise appeared in his eyes. Although he had already guessed that the barbarian emperor altar he found was likely related to the opening of the Western barbarian emperor tomb, this was still beyond his expectations. Now, the people of the Western barbarian emperor had borrowed the power of the 5 altars to break into the emperor tomb. What should he do? He had to follow the example and build 5 more flesh and blood altars. Not to mention the fact that Qin Yu didn't know how to do it. Even if he could see through everything, he still wouldn't have enough time. By the time he finished everything, perhaps the competition for the treasures in the emperor tomb would have already come to an end. He had hidden himself and waited for an opportunity. But now, others had used a method that he couldn't do to enter the emperor tomb. This was the same as throwing Qin Yu off the wagon, and he no longer had a chance to intervene. "Calm down, don't panic." Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the urge to rush out. His eyes swept over the broken space and the faintly discernible emperor tomb. The people of the Western barbarian emperor tomb had smoothly entered. But this process wasn't it a bit too smooth? What about the Western barbarians? They could only watch helplessly as the Western barbarian emperor tomb cultivated. Would they be able to break into their own ancestors' mausoleum and peacefully reap the wealth of the dead? There was a problem. To Qin Yu, having a problem was a good sign. Otherwise, he really would have been left behind and could only be an outsider. Moreover, he wasn't close to either the Western barbarians or the Western barbarians. If both sides fought to the death, he would be happy to watch from the sidelines. Or, to put it more bluntly, the more intense their conflict was, the more likely Qin Yu was to find an opportunity. Otherwise, if everything went according to plan, he didn't have the slightest confidence that he could snatch food from the jaws of both sides. In other words, Qin Yu's best choice right now was to wait for the Western barbarians to respond. Of course, the truth was that this was the only thing he could do right now. Shrouded in darkness, Qin Yu became increasingly cautious. He completely restrained his aura and even closed his eyes, no longer paying attention to the emperor tomb in the broken space. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, an hour passed. In the dull and boring wait, anxiety slowly broke through the soil, gradually filling his heart. Just as Qin Yu was about to lose his patience, the The Western barbarians that he was waiting for finally arrived. The leader was an incomparably old man. One of his eyes had been pierced by a terrifying scar. As he looked up at the broken space, his remaining eye flashed with an icy cold light. This was the leader of the Dark Knight tribe. Behind him followed nearly 100 barbarian powerhouses. There were leaders of various tribes, as well as peak barbarian powerhouses. Every one of them had a terrifying aura. At this time, as they breathed through their noses and mouths, there was the faint sound of wind and thunder. The air seemed to freeze, as if a mountain was pressing down on one's chest, making it difficult to breathe. Deep underground, Chinyu was shrouded in darkness. At this moment, his mind violently shrank. It was like countless tiny needles were constantly trying to pierce into his flesh and blood, his soul. This was probably the so-called feeling of a needle on his back. He felt a great sense of unease, as if he would be discovered in the next moment. Leader, they have already entered the Emperor Tomb for an hour. Space suddenly wriggled, and a thin and small figure appeared. He was crawling on the ground, and his exposed flesh and blood were densely covered in strange scriptures. When one looked at him, they would feel dizzy and see stars. They would feel endless chaos and a strange feeling. The Western barbarians had people hiding here all this time, and the 5 peak sovereign-level powerhouses from the Western wilds hadn't noticed them at all. Qin Yu's heart chilled. A cold sweat instantly soaked through his clothes. While he was horrified, he also rejoiced that he had been careful enough. If he had been the slightest bit careless, he would have been exposed. However, this also verified Qin Yu's previous guess. The Western barbarians had long since noticed the invasion from the Western wilds. Before this, they had deliberately allowed Yi Qin, Yi Xiling, the Night Demon Sect Master, and the others to enter the Emperor Tomb. They had even deliberately waited an hour before appearing. This proved that the Western barbarians had sufficient confidence in the Emperor Tomb and that they wouldn't easily succeed. Or perhaps they were simply using the Emperor Tomb to kill people. The Dark Knight tribe leader sneered. The guests must be impatient. Then let's not delay any longer. He reached into his chest and took out a black stone. With a light cracking sound, it shattered into powder. The Emperor Tomb that was hidden in a spatial vault suddenly erupted with a rich black light. It fell down like an arrow, wrapping around the Dark Knight tribe leader. He stepped forwards, as if he were stepping on stone steps. Like this, he ascended to the heavens. The other Dark Knight tribe powerhouses followed behind. Night Shadow, you continue to guard here. Once we all enter, close the channel. A voice sounded out from afar. A thin man covered in scriptures bowed to the ground. Chapter 1495. His chance had come. In the darkness underground, Qin Yu patiently waited. Nearly 100 Goliath powerhouses entered the Emperor Tomb through the channel. When the last person disappeared in the black light, his eyes flashed open, a cold light flashing in them. He had to be fast. Once the channel was closed, Qin Yu didn't believe he had the ability to open it again. Bang! The ground shattered and he shot into the skies, his face filled with anger. Yi Ying, you betrayed the chief. But with me here, you can forget about harming the Goliath tribe. Yi Ying was stunned. He was truly stunned. He stared blankly on as an unfamiliar Goliath powerhouse shot into the skies, hurtling towards him. His mind instantly froze. He was the chief's man. With the chief's suspicious nature, he might have made some preparations. But I clearly didn't do anything. So why would he say I betrayed him? Stop. Just what are you? Yi Ying's roar came to an abrupt halt. Because of the unfamiliar Goliath powerhouse, his speed suddenly rose in midair. A sharp killing intent rushed towards him, covering him and nearly freezing the blood in his body. He wants to kill me. As this thought flashed through his mind, Yi Ying rushed towards the channel. His reaction speed was extremely fast, but it was already too late. Qin Yu had pretended to be a Goliath powerhouse and gained the upper hand. Although it seemed to pass in the blink of an eye, it was enough for him to do many things. For instance, kill someone. Bang! With a dull thud, Yi Ying's head exploded. The terrifying strength didn't stop there. It invaded his body, sweeping out and annihilating all his life force. This scout, raised by the Dark Knight tribe, had an amazing concealment ability, enough to hide from peak sovereign powerhouses. But his true strength was far from being able to compare with his concealment ability. To raise such an elite scout required an astonishing amount of resources. To kill him, one naturally had to pay the appropriate price. For instance, the backlash of the scriptures. The moment that the Goliath powerhouse died, the scriptures engraved on his flesh and blood suddenly came to life. Like a black viper, they howled towards Qin Yu. The moment they touched him, they fused into his body. Qin Yu frowned. Before he could respond, a purple rune appeared between his eyebrows, emitting a dazzling light. At the same time, he could hear a faint cracking sound in his ears. Kacha! Kacha! It was like a dam that had reached its limit and was about to collapse. At this time, the purple rune between Qin Yu's eyebrows was the curse immunity rune he obtained after withstanding the curse of the endless sea. Right now, it was clear that it would soon be unable to withstand the power of the curse from the dead berserker. Once it invaded his body, regardless of whether it was fatal, it would bring him a great deal of trouble. At the moment when he was about to enter the imperial mausoleum, to Qin Yu, this was clearly an unacceptable consequence. Stone Tower! Qin Yu roared out loud. Right now, he could only hope that this nearly omniscient stone pagoda could give him a pleasant surprise at a critical moment. But at this moment, a ripple suddenly spread out from his body. Before the stone tower could respond, someone had already moved. It was a big furnace. Hum! Within Qin Yu's body, the attribute of the great Tao instantly changed. It released an endless Yin chill and annihilation. In the next moment, the purple curse rune between his eyebrows began to shine brightly. Within the incomparably dense purple, a faint gold appeared. At first there was only a faint layer, but it soon spread out. In just several breaths of time, the rune itself had completely transformed into a pale gold color. The sound of shattering vanished. All that was left was the sound of chewing and swallowing. All of the black scriptures that had invaded his body were cleanly eaten up. The great Tao of the curse attribute. Qin Yu revealed a happy expression. He discovered that in the imperial capital, taking a risk to kill Ning Shao was the best decision he had ever made. The great furnace's transformation had caused his great Tao to take another step forwards. Now, it had already helped him cross two great tribulations. To be able to freely change the attribute of one's great Tao, just this alone was enough to give one countless pleasant surprises. For instance, when combined with his own ever-changing ability, he could perfectly imitate all the saints of the Western Desolate that had been confirmed in the imperial palace. If even his great Tao was the same, then who could distinguish between the real and the fake? Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed his thoughts. His eyes fell on the black pillar of light, and he stepped forwards. In fact, the safest method right now was to wait a little longer before entering the imperial mausoleum. At the very least, he had to wait until the numerous powerhouses of the Western Desolate Continent were far enough away to avoid the tragic fate of being discovered as soon as he entered. But when he killed the Western Desolate Continent scout just now, he had nearly suffered a backlash from the Black Scriptures. Qin Yu wasn't confident that the Western Desolate Continent powerhouses wouldn't notice him. Thus, he could only rush into the Imperial Mausoleum as soon as possible to avoid any unexpected complications. The black light seemed to be just a beam of light, but after entering it, he discovered that it wasn't so simple at all. It was extremely viscous, like some sort of greasy oil. As he walked in, he could even feel a heavy sense of oppression. Stepping forwards, Qin Yu pushed aside the suppressive strength and continued upwards. Just as he arrived at the edge of the spatial fault and was about to step in, his complexion changed. he felt a strong sense of unease. Stopping, Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows and thought for a moment. There was a loud, cracking sound in his flesh and bones, and his body instantly shrank. He was incomparably thin. Countless strange scriptures began to appear on the surface of his exposed flesh. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into the Western Desolate Continent Scout that had just been killed. And during this process, a golden curse rune appeared between Qin Yu's eyebrows, causing the scriptures on his body to come alive. That's right, he had come alive. Not only did he look exactly the same as the Western Desolate Continent Scout, but he even had the same curse attribute. They truly came from the same source. After changing his aura and confirming that he hadn't missed anything, Qin Yu took a deep breath and stepped forwards. Bang! The moment Qin Yu entered the spatial fault, a boundless and terrifying aura of annihilation swept out. But at this moment, Qin Yu suddenly understood. This was a sort of confirmation method that prevented anyone who wasn't a Western Desolate Continent member from entering the Imperial Mausoleum. If he hadn't sensed it just now and rashly stepped in, he feared he would have been crushed to pieces by that destructive aura. And everything the Western Desolate people did before should have been to avoid this strength and smoothly enter the Imperial Mausoleum. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the joy and fear in his heart. He looked up at the Imperial Mausoleum in front of him. He was about to reach the end of the passage. He continued forwards. The viscous black light shined down on the thick and solid walls of the Imperial Mausoleum. After a moment of hesitation, Qin Yu reached out a hand. The moment his fingertips touched the stone wall, he felt a strong, pulling strength. He didn't resist. Instead, he allowed this strength to wrap around him. His body instantly passed through the stone wall and entered the Imperial Mausoleum. Shwa! Cold sweat instantly broke out and covered his forehead. Because at this moment, Qin Yu, who had just stepped into the Imperial Mausoleum, had fallen into the encirclement of the Western Desolate Continent barbarians. Countless icy cold eyes were like sharp swords, nailing him to the ground. The Dark Knight tribe leader's icy cold eyes locked onto him. Night Shadow, what happened? Because Qin Yu had already learned from his Excellency ruler that he would be entering the Western Desolate. He had learned the Western Desolate Continent's language. Thus, communication wasn't a problem. His thoughts raced. Without hesitation, Qin Yu slumped to the ground as if he had been frightened out of his wits. His voice trembled as he said, Leader, after you left, a Western Desolate cultivator suddenly rushed out from underground. I wasn't his match, so I could only flee into the passage. The Dark Knight tribe leader sneered. He dared to lie to me. Kill him. No. Qin Yu shouted out loud. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He could feel the thick, killing intent of the surrounding Goliath powerhouses. It was clear that if he didn't do something, he really would die. As for resisting with just him alone, even if he used all his cards, all that awaited him was death. Very good. It seems you've decided to tell me the truth. Then tell me who you are. You actually dared to pretend to be a scout of my Dark Knight tribe. I fear you don't know the true secret of my Dark Knight tribe scouts. The Dark Knight tribe leader's voice was oppressive. This is your last chance. I hope you don't make a decision you will regret. He spoke far too much. This was a bit abnormal. Qin Yu felt as if he had grasped onto something. He swept his eyes around and determined that there was no hope of escaping. Then he could only give it his all. He closed his eyes and shouted, Leader, everything I said is true. It is because I am your scout that you should know that I really am me. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. The death he was waiting for didn't arrive. Qin Yu slowly opened his eyes and saw the Dark Knight tribe leader frowning. In fact, Qin Yu had made the right bet. The scouts of the Dark Knight tribe had amazing concealment abilities. First, it was because of their outstanding talent, and second, it was because of the scriptures that were bestowed upon them by the tribe. Not only could they provide the scouts with a super strong concealment ability, but they were also the key to determining their identities, or to put it more bluntly, These scriptures could ensure that all scouts were loyal and devoted to the tribe leader and would never do anything that would harm the tribe's interests. This was because, in the eyes of the tribe leader, the scriptures that were engraved on the surface of their bodies were like lighthouses in the dark night. They were incomparably dazzling and could not be concealed at all. For the same reason, no one could continue to impersonate the Dark Knight tribe scout after killing him. This was because the scriptures could be imitated, but the charm and aura could not be imitated. There was also the curse power that came from the tribe. It was even more impossible to impersonate. But this was also what the Dark Knight tribe leader couldn't figure out. Because just now he had indeed sensed the scout's death. Could it be that he had sensed wrongly? Or perhaps it was because of this emperor's tomb that his perception of the outside world had been distorted. It might not be the case in other places, but this was the emperor's tomb of the last barbarian emperor. It had a natural suppressive ability to the barbarian tribes, so it was not impossible for such an abnormality to occur. He had made the right bet. Qin Yu's heart was filled with excitement. He felt that he had been circling the gates of hell a few times. But on the surface, he did not dare to show any of it, because the long sword was still hanging above his head. He could not say for sure if it would fall down at any moment and behead him. "Get up." The Dark Knight tribe leader spoke slowly, and the killing intent around the many barbarian tribes' warriors receded. Qin Yu struggled to get up, and at this moment, the Dark Knight tribe leader suddenly spoke. "Since you have come in, then hand over the thing I gave you before." In a flash, Qin Yu raised his head in shock, and his face was filled with confusion. "Leader, what did you say?" The Dark Knight tribe leader glanced at him, but did not answer. He said in a deep voice, "Destroy the passage." The group of barbarian tribes' warriors hesitated, but in the end they were not satisfied with going against his will. Accompanied by a few roars, a few barbarian tribes' warriors attacked fiercely and heavily bombarded the stone walls of the emperor's tomb. The strong recoil caused them to fly backwards, and blood spurted out from their mouths and noses. But such an action had also forcefully shattered the blacklight pillar outside the emperor's tomb and dissipated it. At this point, the emperor's tomb was cut off from the outside world. Unless someone obtained the inheritance, then the passage could be opened again. "All of you stay here and recuperate. The rest of you follow me." The Dark Knight tribe leader turned around and ordered, "Ying, go and scout the way with 1,000 faces." "Yes, leader." Only at this moment did Qin Yu really pass. The most dangerous part was actually the last question. If he had even a moment of hesitation, he would have been killed without hesitation. But Qin Yu was very clear that he had entered the emperor's tomb to fight for the hope of becoming a demi-emperor. At this time, as long as there was a chance, the barbarian tribe's warriors would gather all the strength they could use, so why would they stay in the outside world? So he did the right thing and successfully survived. Chapter 1496. The Western Savage Emperor Mausoleum was a grand and massive group of palaces. Although the construction style was a bit rough, it had a unique and majestic momentum. But the most surprising thing was that these massive palaces actually didn't have a roof. Looking up, all one could see was a pitch-black darkness. It was as if endless night had gathered together, able to swallow and submerge everything. Qin Yu was currently staring at the darkness above his head. His eyebrows furrowed and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. When he saw this darkness, he understood why Li Ijo had gone through so much trouble to find the darkness ruler from the broken world to carry his last chance of survival. This darkness seemed ordinary at first, but its aura was connected to the entire Emperor Mausoleum. It could even be said that this was the foundation upon which the Western Savage Emperor Mausoleum could exist. The reason he said this was because the palaces within the Emperor Mausoleum didn't have a roof. Rather, they had blended into the darkness, or rather, they were a part of this curtain of night. Qin Yu had already received some reminders from the darkness ruler, so he wasn't surprised by this. What he truly cared about was that this darkness wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. There seemed to be something else hidden within. Vaguely, the feeling was not clear. Thinking about it, Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. The dark emperor crown appeared above his head, and the eye of eternal night flashed with a halo. Great furnace! With a loud shout, the attributes of the great Tao within his body instantly changed. Absolute darkness gushed out from Qin Yu's body, wrapping around him and turning him into a part of the darkness. At this moment, he was the darkness ruler. No, in terms of the absolute strength he could mobilize, he was even stronger than the darkness ruler. Thus, in front of Qin Yu, the darkness that covered the entire emperor mausoleum suddenly became clear. Tiny specks of light appeared in the depths of the endless darkness, twinkling like stars. Behind the darkness, there were actually endless stars. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would have found it hard to believe. What were these stars? They were hidden in the darkness. It wasn't because they were naturally shy and embarrassed to show their faces to others. Qin Yu frowned. He stared at these stars, trying to find out what secrets they were hiding. As he looked, he suddenly fell into a trance. In that endless sea of stars, he discovered an eye. Shua! Cold sweat instantly appeared, covering his forehead. Qin Yu's complexion paled, and he couldn't help but feel a great fear. Stop that thought. I can't think about it, or I'll be discovered. Qin Yu didn't know who the owner of this eye was, but he could feel an intense, dangerous aura emanating from it. If he exposed himself and was discovered by the owner of this eye, he would fall into an incomparably terrifying situation. He took a deep breath and tried to suppress the shock in his heart. After a long time, he finally managed to calm down. Shua! His figure flickered, and he rapidly left where he was. As he moved, quickly his thoughts raced. This was the Western Savage Imperial Mausoleum. This eye hidden in the darkness, and the endless sea of stars must have something to do with this place. In other words, it was definitely related to that incomparably powerful ancient barbarian emperor. Or, if one were to guess more boldly, it was that barbarian emperor's eyes. A great wave of fear surged forth. Could it be that the barbarian emperor was still alive? Reality was far more wonderful and bizarre than the script. Qin Yu never imagined that besides the Western wilds and the Western barbarians, if he wanted to obtain the rare Goliath treasure and complete the Lord Ruler's mission, he would encounter even more terrifying enemies. Although he didn't know much about this barbarian great emperor who had died many years ago. But just from the time he tried to reach the martial emperor realm, it wasn't difficult to conclude that this great emperor was at least a half-martial emperor realm powerhouse. If such an existence really hadn't died, then everyone who broke into his mausoleum and tried to steal the wealth of the dead had already taken a step into the gates of hell. There was no chance of survival. This naturally included Qin Yu. Was he panicking? Of course he was panicking. It was the same for anyone else. But in fact, in this situation, panicking was useless. It would only cause him to die faster. So, while Qin Yu was panicking, he was desperately telling himself not to panic. This was truly a strange and contradictory situation. He had to calm down. Most importantly, if the barbarian great emperor was really still alive, then his tomb would have been dug up by now. He definitely wouldn't be so quiet. That's right, it was like this. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's heart calmed down a little. He could finally catch his breath. According to his speculations, the barbarian great emperor was indeed still alive. But since he had remained silent, this meant that it was difficult for him to make a move. At least he couldn't make a move right now. Although there were many reasons, no matter which one it was, it showed that the barbarian great emperor couldn't act recklessly. There was a great flaw or restriction. A sharp light flashed in Qin Yu's eyes. He felt that he had to change his way of thinking. Before, he was thinking about how to provoke conflict between the Western wilderness and the Western barbarians. After all, he had said before that whether it was the Western wilderness or the Western barbarians, he wasn't close to them, let alone close to them. If both sides fought until their heads bled and they perished together, then Qin Yu could stand on the riverside and reap the benefits. But now he couldn't continue like this. His greatest enemy was the eye hidden in the darkness behind the endless stars. It was the master of this mausoleum. He had to think of a way to make the Western wilderness and the Western barbarians realize this as soon as possible. Otherwise, if they fought, who would deal with the great demon? But the problem was, even if he thought about it clearly, what should he do? Qin Yu stopped moving. His eyes flickered with uncertainty as he vaguely thought of something. But he still needed to test it out first. First, he needed to verify whether or not his idea was feasible. Second, he needed to test Qin Yu's speculations. What if all of this was just his imagination running wild and he wasn't right at all? In any case, he had to make some preparations. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu flicked his finger. A drop of blood flew out and floated in front of him. This drop of blood contained a powerful aura as well as his own exuberant vitality. Looking at it with his naked eye, he couldn't see any changes. But Qin Yu felt that there were some changes. It was just that he hadn't noticed them yet. He frowned. After carefully observing it for a while, he still couldn't find anything. Qin Yu thought for a moment. He lifted a hand and gently tapped his forehead, activating the connection between him and the divine kingdom. In the past, the Western barbarian Great Emperor had established the powerful ancient barbarian kingdom. Naturally, he had touched upon the level of a divine kingdom. If he started from this aspect, he might be able to obtain some harvests. Reality proved that this was indeed effective. After Qin Yu activated the connection between him and the divine kingdom, the drop of blood in front of him suddenly underwent a clear change. It dimmed, unlike the fresh blood that could be seen with the naked eye. Using the divine kingdom to sense it, this drop of blood seemed to have been left there for a long time. It had completely lost its vitality. And the reason why this happened was because there was a power being drawn out, enveloping the entire mausoleum and robbing all the vitality. And this power came from the darkness that enveloped the entire mausoleum. Or, to be more precise, it came from the stars hidden in the darkness. Qin Yu couldn't see its final destination, but this was enough to support him. He came to a clear conclusion. There was something wrong with this eye, and his method was feasible. A peak sovereign was infinitely close to the emperor realm. Their eyesight was naturally astonishing. Even without the divine kingdom, they would be able to sense that something was wrong. Then let's do it. In reality, Qin Yu's plan was very simple and crude. His current identity was the Dark Knight tribe scout Ying, and he was indeed a very outstanding scout. At least in terms of aura concealment ability, no one in the mausoleum was better than him. Therefore, it wasn't difficult for him to find the cultivators from the West Desolation. With a bit of manipulation and some bait, it was easy to have the tentacles of both sides collide in a small area. As mentioned before, the West Desolation and the Western barbarians were like fire and water. There was a life and death enmity between them that lasted for generations. Whenever they saw each other, their eyes would turn red with anger, much less in this place. The West Desolation cultivators thought, fuck, they really were discovered. As for the Western barbarians, they thought these bastards who dug up their ancestral graves so they didn't have anything to say to them. When they saw them, they would fight them to the death. The process was violent and intense. In short, both sides suffered casualties. After a desperate battle, seeing that they couldn't crush their opponents, they could only strategically retreat and seek help from the larger forces. The dozen or so West Desolation and Western barbarian cultivators that had been fighting each other, all of them staring at each other with hatred in their eyes. Qin Yu's figure appeared not too far away from the battlefield. He had done everything he could. He could only hope that they weren't a bunch of idiots. Shwa. His figure flickered, and he vanished from sight. An hour later, Qin Yu returned to where the Goliath tribe people were. He bowed and said, "Leader, subordinate has found the West Desolation cultivators." This was a fact, and Qin Yu didn't hide it. In fact, after the scripture runes on his body came to life, The Dark Knight tribe leader was able to sense his position. Telling the truth was the most correct decision. The Dark Knight tribe leader looked at him. "Stand up." Qin Yu respectfully nodded. He stood up and looked around. He couldn't help but frown. There was a problem. The Goliath cultivators that had a small-scale conflict with the West Desolation should have already returned to report. But the Goliath cultivators were extremely calm. Could it be that they didn't realize there was a problem with their bodies? If so, then things would be troublesome. They couldn't have Qin Yu directly say that he had seen an eye. Night Shadow continued to monitor the West Desolation cultivators. "Don't alert them. Report to me at any time." Qin Yu obeyed and left, a sharp light flashing in his eyes. This was perfect. Since he hadn't obtained a clear answer from the Goliath tribe, then he might as well go to the West Desolation and take a look. Perhaps there would be a harvest. The people of the West Desolation who were one step ahead and entered the mausoleum didn't look too good. The reason was because they realized that they seemed to have underestimated the danger in the mausoleum. Not to mention the other things. Just the awakened stone statues had brought them a lot of trouble. Although there were 5 peak sovereigns who attacked and didn't cause any casualties, the group's speed was still slowed down. It was much slower than the original plan. At the same time, the sudden appearance of the Western barbarians also made everyone feel uneasy. As expected, the Goliath had already made arrangements for the descent of the mausoleum. In fact, if they thought about the dangers, the fact that they could enter the mausoleum without any trouble was also because the Western barbarians had done it on purpose. If that was really the case, then they had to be extra careful in what they did next. To be cautious, the 5 peak sovereigns ordered the group to maintain a high level of vigilance. They arranged for the saints under them to patrol the surroundings to ensure that they wouldn't be ambushed while they were resting. In the quiet hall, a saint of the West Desolation was quietly lying on the head of a giant stone statue. His heart almost stopped beating, and his aura was completely restrained. Only a pair of eyes remained cold and silent as they stared at every corner of the hall. He was ordered to guard this place. Once he sensed something wrong, he would immediately send out a signal. Suddenly, the saint frowned slightly, as if he had sensed something, but when he tried to sense it, he couldn't find anything. Was it an illusion? He was hesitating whether to send out a signal or not, when his eyes suddenly widened. The next moment, his pupils that had shrunk into a ball suddenly froze, and then immediately collapsed and became dim. A black shadow appeared behind him. After a few breaths, a light flashed and a figure walked out. Looking at it, it was the saint of the West Desolation who had died on the head of the stone statue. He looked down and flicked his sleeves. Dark power quietly corroded the corpse, wrapping it up and crushing it into powder. Whew! With a breath, all traces disappeared. Qin Yu looked around and patiently lay on the head of the stone statue. He maintained the same posture as the unlucky guy just now, quietly waiting for his turn. Half an hour later, footsteps sounded. Qin Yu flew down from the stone statue and frowned. "Be careful, it's best not to make any noise." After saying that, he didn't wait for the person changing shifts to speak and quickly left. Coincidentally, when Qin Yu entered the place where the West Desolation people were resting, he happened to see what happened next. 5 lords, the dead saint has been dealt with, and the remaining injured have also received treatment. Luckily, their injuries aren't too serious. At this point, the messenger revealed a look of hesitation. However, there seems to be something wrong with their condition. This person clearly wanted to say something, but hesitated. The woman from the Emperor clan raised her hand and interrupted him. "All right, we already know what happened. Go and rest first." She looked straight at him, conveying a dignified will. Yes, Lord." The West Desolation saint bowed his head and retreated. Chapter 1497. After a short discussion, the 5 sovereigns decided to leave 2 saints to take care of the injured, while the rest continued to explore the mausoleum. Everyone knew that it was extremely dangerous to leave the protection of the 5 sovereigns when the experts of the barbarian tribe had entered the mausoleum. Once they were discovered by the barbarian tribe, they would definitely die. But whether it was the injured or the chosen 2 saints, in the face of the will of the 5 sovereigns, they had no power to resist. They could only silently accept it. The team began to move. Qin Yu mixed in with them and tried to be as low-key as possible, for fear that his performance would be noticed. After all, their cultivation and aura could be exactly the same, but their daily behavior and habits were not something he could imitate. The good news was that the cultivators of the Western wilderness came from all over the world, and most of them were not familiar with each other. In addition, Qin Yu deliberately kept a low profile, so there was nothing wrong. The reason why he continued to stay was that he wanted to confirm whether the Western wilderness and the Western barbarians had already noticed something. Previously, when the saint's report was interrupted, there was indeed something unusual. Qin Yu saw the scene, but he did not dare to confirm it. This matter could be said to be a matter of life and death, so he had to get the final confirmation. Because the previous journey had been passed by the Western wilderness cultivators, Qin Yu did not encounter too much danger. Now that he had mixed in with the Western wilderness team and followed the pioneers, he felt for the first time the horror of the mausoleum of the Western barbarians. The most terrifying thing was the stone statues that were everywhere. As long as they sensed the aura of living beings, they would come back to life. Most of their appearances were extremely rough, showing a strong barbarian style, but the speed and strength they possessed were shocking. It seemed that because of the long years of being immersed in the aura of the mausoleum, they had absorbed some kind of power. The stone statues were indestructible, and they could burst out with a terrifying power that made people's hearts palpitate. Qin Yu saw with his own eyes that a saint of the Western wilderness was sent flying by a stone statue that came back to life, and blood spurted out of his mouth and nose. If it were not for the powerful sovereigns who instantly shattered the stone statue, the saint would have been killed on the spot. The strangest and most terrifying thing was that the shattered stone statues weren't destroyed. Instead, they instantly returned to their original positions. It was as if they had once again fallen into a deep slumber and were silently accumulating energy while waiting for their next awakening. Seeing how the Western desolate cultivators weren't surprised by this, Qin Yu knew that this wasn't an isolated case. In fact, it was likely that they had already tried to destroy the stone statues in the imperial mausoleum before. Not even peak sovereigns were able to do this. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's gaze towards these stone statues became even more dignified. Vaguely, he felt that these terrifying and indestructible stone statues were not as simple as they seemed. Some thoughts flashed through his mind, but when he thought about it carefully, he could not grasp the crux of it. Qin Yu frowned. As he was thinking, he suddenly felt someone approaching. Frowning, he raised his head and looked to his side. There was a slight change in his heartbeat, but his face remained calm. Blood Flag's eyes were cold. They were like 2 arrows that shot out, wanting to pierce through Qin Yu's chest and nail him to the ground. "What's up?" Because he didn't know how to respond, Qin Yu could only speak as briefly as possible. And with Blood Flag in front of him, he naturally couldn't remain silent. Otherwise, that would be the greatest abnormality. But short words often represented a tough attitude. At this moment, Qin Yu keenly sensed that everyone around him was looking at him with surprise. They never imagined that Qin Yu would use such an attitude to approach Blood Flag. He had made a mistake. Qin Yu cursed inwardly, but he still maintained a calm expression. He knew that he couldn't panic right now. If he revealed any abnormalities, that would be the same as exposing himself. So he continued to calmly look at Blood Flag, as if he didn't notice anything happening around him. "This is your decision," Blood Flag slowly said. In truth, Qin Yu was in a completely stunned state. But even in this state, he still had to maintain a calm composure, as if he knew everything and everything was within his grasp. How should he put it? This was a test of his mental fortitude and also required superb acting skills in order to accomplish this. Luckily, Qin Yu didn't lack either. So he slowly nodded. A single action had already given his answer. The more one did, the more mistakes one made. If he could avoid speaking then, he absolutely wouldn't. Very good. Blood Flag sneered. He turned and walked away. At this moment, Qin Yu could clearly feel the eyes around him revealing surprise, admiration, and all sorts of other emotions. That wasn't right. Why was one of them so hot without batting an eyelid? Qin Yu glanced over. He was nearly burned blind by the other party's fiery gaze. Luckily, the other party was a woman. If she were a man, Qin Yu didn't dare to guarantee that he would still be able to maintain his acting skills. With this little interlude, the 5 peak sovereigns didn't even glance over. It was clear they didn't want to waste any time or energy on a group of little fellows. After this wave of stone statue attacks ended and a break was announced, everyone began to disperse. Qin Yu walked to a corner. Before he could think, his complexion changed. That woman walked over. She arrived at Qin Yu's side, her eyes shining. "You really are thinking about me." Her words were extremely gentle, but there was a hint of sweetness in them. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. He nodded, not speaking. The rules were the same as before. If he could remain silent, he would remain silent. He absolutely wouldn't say half a word more. It was just that being stared at by those sweet eyes made his hair stand on end. The woman fiercely dug into his eyes. She stamped her feet. "Sue on you, don't be so stingy. Although I said a few words to you, could it be, Humph, come with me." She turned and walked away. This area had already been swept and was temporarily in a safe period. As long as he wasn't too far away from the group, there would be no problems. But even if he wasn't too far away in this emperor tomb, it was enough to conceal himself. This was truly a cover-up. Perhaps this was the effect of the Western barbarian emperor tomb. As long as he was more than 100 meters away, his movements would be covered. Unless he was close, it would be difficult to detect him. This was a kind of use of the divine kingdom's power. Qin Yu could barely sense it, but he couldn't use it. Even so, it was enough to help him be far more sensitive than others in the emperor tomb. This was why he was able to easily find the Western barbarian cultivators in the emperor tomb. This was why Qin Yu was able to easily kill the stone statue without giving Su Anyu any time to react. Should he follow her, Qin Yu only hesitated for a second before he followed her. It wasn't because this woman was quite beautiful, but because the surrounding gazes made him very clear that rejecting her would definitely be very abrupt and would likely cause trouble. When the chasing gazes behind him were blocked, Qin Yu stopped. The woman who led the way in front turned around and threw herself at him. Qin Yu barely managed to retract the punch that he was about to throw out. The next moment, a warm and fragrant jade filled his arms. It felt smooth and soft. In short, it felt very good. "Dead man, I knew you would give that thing to him. Although the blood flag is powerful, as long as you are with me, there is no need to be afraid of him," the woman said as she twisted her body. This gave Qin Yu a very strange feeling. The saints he had seen were mostly dignified. They had never experienced such a scene. Was it that the saints were not saints in private, or was this woman in front of him an exception? Cough, cough. No matter how he thought about it, the possibility of the former was higher. Stop. There was no time to think about it now. Qin Yu coughed lightly. He put his hands on his shoulders and pushed the woman slightly away from his arms. "All right, look at where you are." It wasn't good to speak lightly or harshly, and it was even worse to hug her. It was really difficult. The woman snorted and suddenly reached down. Qin Yu took a step back and narrowly avoided the small hand that was picking the peach. Hiss! At this moment, he really sucked in a breath of cold air. Were the saints all so open in private? The woman glared at Qin Yu and gritted her teeth. "Now you're pretending. Why weren't you like this when you were in my room?" Qin Yu lowered his head and did not speak. Firstly, he really didn't know what to say. Secondly, he was afraid that if he continued to speak, he would hear something that was not suitable to be said. Humph. Just you wait. See if I don't bite you hard next time, the woman said fiercely, but her eyes were watery and she subconsciously licked her red lips. Qin Yu was almost numb. What kind of feeling was it to have one's bottom line crossed again and again? Anyway, Qin Yu felt very sour. He always felt that the circle of the rich was very messy. Where are the things? A cold chill instantly struck his heart. Qin Yu instantly broke free from his nearly numb state and coughed. Now isn't the time. As for when, only a ghost knew. The woman glared at him. You are so cautious that you don't even trust me. Good, good, good. Just you wait. I will bring you to see the Lord as soon as possible. With that, she turned and walked away. Her slender waist and plump bottom swayed in front of him. She was truly amorous. Qin Yu suddenly felt that it was best for him to leave as soon as possible. If he continued to stay here, he feared there would be major problems. But the woman's words just now seemed to have a different meaning. Qin Yu was distressed that he couldn't confirm this matter, so he was a bit unwilling to leave now. After hesitating again and again, Qin Yu clenched his teeth and didn't turn around to leave. When he returned to the group, he was met with several contemptuous gazes. At first, he didn't respond. It was only after walking several steps that he regained his composure. His heart was trembling. Did the sages of West Wilderness have nothing better to do? Just what were they thinking about in their heads? My physique, my aura, my eyes, cough, cough. Even if my physique isn't mine, these two things should be enough for you to judge just what kind of man I am. A man that can support the heavens and earth. What was this little bit of time? Let me tell you, even if it was multiplied by 10, no, 100 times, it would still be far from enough. Qin Yu secretly sneered. It wasn't that he had the mind to care about these things right now. This was related to a man's dignity. He absolutely couldn't tolerate such things. When the group was about to finish, the woman walked over and said, "Let's go. The Lord asked me to bring you there." Her efficiency was quite fast. Qin Yu certainly didn't have any objections. He nodded and followed behind. He wanted to ask a few questions, but when he opened his mouth, he discovered that he didn't even know the name of this woman. That was a bit too much, so he didn't ask. Qin Yu shut his mouth. He followed behind her through a corridor and entered the main hall. During this process, he could clearly feel the envious gazes behind him. Humph, humph, the source of all malice really came from jealousy. It was her. Qin Yu never imagined that the one in this main hall would be that peak ruler from an emperor race. Although he was surprised, he didn't reveal anything on his face. He quickly stepped forwards and bowed. Su On Yu greets the Lord. He had to thank this woman who had nearly succeeded in plucking the peach. Otherwise, Qin Yu would have been left speechless to discover that he didn't even know his name. Rise. The peak ruler from the emperor race had a calm expression. Don't worry. As long as you follow me loyally, I will ensure your safety. Chapter 1498. Qin Yu, Su On Yu, respectfully bowed. He had already seen the great figure behind this woman, and he had also obtained the other party's promise of protection. It was clear that he would soon offer a treasure to express his loyalty. After all, this was something that the absolute ruler of the Emperor clan had emphasized. But the problem was that Qin Yu had no idea what they were talking about. Thus, he couldn't allow things to progress according to normal circumstances. He had to be the first to ask questions in order to obtain an answer. My lord, Qin Yu suddenly said, an Anu wishes to know the true situation of the Western barbarian emperor tomb. If possible, I hope that you can tell me the truth. The woman, standing respectfully to the side, revealed a look of worry. She glared at him and was about to speak. But before she could speak, the absolute ruler of the Emperor clan waved his hand and interrupted her. She looked down, her expression indifferent, not revealing the least bit of emotion. What do you want to know? Qin Yu was anxious. He knew that he was playing with fire, but since he had already asked, he could only brace himself and continue. My lord, an Anu wishes to know whether or not the situation within the imperial tomb is as simple as everyone says. The hall fell silent. The absolute ruler of the Emperor clan furrowed his eyebrows for a moment before composing himself. You are a smart person. You must have sensed something. That's right, the imperial tomb is still hidden, and it is the most crucial part of the entire plan. She turned and looked deep into the hall. There was a stone statue there. Although it was submerged in darkness, one could still feel a faint, oppressive pressure. Within the Western Barbarian Emperor tomb, there is a hidden treasure that can help a peak ruler leap into the half-emperor realm. The absolute ruler of the Emperor clan swept his eyes over. With your Sioux family strength, you should have known of this long ago. But the truth is that it isn't so easy to reach the half-emperor realm. A treasure, no matter how powerful it is still an inanimate object. How can it help a peak ruler complete a critical transformation in their life's order? His heart began to race. Qin Yu's eyes widened. He faintly felt as if he had grasped onto something. To reach the half-monarch realm, I'll need a catalyst on top of this treasure. Since I can't use an inanimate object, I'll need a living object. She looked at the stone statue in the darkness, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly, revealing a hint of mockery. A dignified barbarian emperor, a giant who once commanded the world, but now he can only be like a dog that has fallen into the water, being chased and forced to hide. This is truly a matter that makes one sigh incessantly. As expected, it was like this. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. In the end, he had underestimated the strength of the Western wilderness and the Western barbarians. Since they had set their sights on the mausoleum of the Western barbarians, how could they not be fully prepared? They had long since known that the Berserker Emperor in the Imperial Mausoleum had yet to die. No, from what the Berserker Emperor had said, he had yet to die completely. His power had been greatly reduced, and he had become the dog that had fallen into the water that the sovereign of the Emperor clan, Juwu, had mentioned. What the Western wilderness knew, there was no reason for the Western barbarians to not know. No wonder both sides were so calm. It turned out that they had a well-thought-out plan. In other words, everything Qin Yu had done was useless. He had simply been overthinking things. But everything had to be looked at from two sides. Although he felt a bit awkward at this moment, at least Qin Yu had confirmed this matter. A great stone had been lifted from his heart. Suan Yu, are you done messing around? The Lord has already given you an explanation, so hurry up and hand over that thing. The woman shouted out. She turned her back to the peak sovereign of the Emperor clan and constantly winked at him. From the looks of it, there was actually a bit of sincerity in her words. Qin Yu coughed. He cupped his hands together and said, My lord, please wait a moment. Anu will immediately bring it for you. As he spoke, a bit of awkwardness appeared on his face. As you know, the Imperial Mausoleum is not safe. In order to ensure my safety, I can only be as careful as possible. The peak sovereign of the Emperor clan frowned. He felt that something was wrong, but the person in front of him was indeed Suan Yu. Since he was him, he absolutely wouldn't dare to lie to her. This was a very simple logic. So, after a moment of hesitation, the peak sovereign of the Emperor clan suppressed this thought. He waved his hand and said go. Qin Yu turned and walked away. Once he was far away from the hall, he quietly let out a sigh of relief. He activated his connection with the Divine Kingdom and determined that he wasn't being followed. Then he didn't linger any longer. He flew far away from the people of the Western wilderness. Since he had obtained the answer, he naturally couldn't stay any longer. He didn't have a hobby of jumping back and forth on a tightrope. With a thought, Qin Yu returned to his original appearance. Suan Yu no longer existed. In this world, the scouts of the Dark Knight tribe would forever disappear. Since the Western wilderness and the Goliath tribe knew that the Goliath sovereign hadn't died, then all he needed to do was hide and quietly wait for a chance. The reason was simple. Qin, you couldn't provoke any one of these three sides. So he would wait for them to fight for a while before doing anything else. As for his future identity, if there was a need, he could just look for one at the last minute. To him, this wasn't a difficult matter at all. But accidents often occurred when a person relaxed. As Qin Yu was thinking about where to hide, he seemed to sense something. His pupils shrank. In the next moment, his ears buzzed and his consciousness went blank. A feeling of fear surged out from the depths of his heart, instantly restoring his clarity of mind. The entire process lasted for less than a breath of time. But at this time, Qin Yu's complexion was so gloomy that it seemed as if it would drip water. He had been caught. "Little fellow, I've finally found you." A calm and old voice sounded out in his mind. Qin Yu took a deep breath. He asked in a low voice, "Who are you?" The old voice sounded out once more. "Since you've already guessed it, why pretend that you don't know?" Cold sweat slid down his forehead, dripping down his cheeks. Qin Yu felt as if he had been placed in an ancient cave of ice. His heart beat with difficulty, and the blood in his body seemed to freeze. It really was him, the Goliath sovereign. Not too long ago, that peak ruler from the western wastelands emperor race had taunted him as a drowning dog. But now that he faced him, Qin Yu discovered that even creatures like drowning dogs had differences in strength. Perhaps in the eyes of those peak rulers, the Goliath sovereign was nothing more than a dish. As soon as he appeared, he would be suppressed. But to Qin Yu, this wasn't the case. He could clearly sense that if the Goliath sovereign wanted to kill him, it would be a simple matter. This wasn't his intuition, but rather that at this time, Qin Yu was wrapped up in an invisible aura. It was extremely soft to the touch, but if needed, it could instantly turn into terrifying fangs that could pierce through Qin Yu's body hundreds of times, turning him into nothing more than a rag. "Little fellow, you are a smart person, so you had best maintain your intelligence." The Goliath sovereign's voice was calm, as if everything was under his control. Qin Yu took a deep breath. He bowed and said, "Greetings, your majesty, Goliath." Before he finished speaking, he was interrupted. "I am the sovereign of the Goliath race, and I have nothing to do with you humans. So, your excuse to delay for time is in truth quite awkward." Just as his voice fell, Qin Yu stuffily coughed and his complexion paled. "This is a little lesson for you. It will help you become more clear-headed and avoid doing stupid things in the future." "Who?" Qin Yu gasped for breath, as if he were a drowning man who had been rescued. "Now, follow my instructions and enter the passage on the right." Qin Yu clenched his fists in his sleeves. Countless thoughts raced through his mind, but in the end he chose to endure it. He didn't have full confidence that he could block the Goliath sovereign's attack. Of course, the most important point was that Qin Yu discovered that the Goliath sovereign didn't have any intention of killing him. At least not yet. If he continued to endure, he might find another opportunity. Stepping forwards, he soon arrived at a fork in the road. Qin Yu swept his eyes around, took a deep breath, and stepped into the passage on the right. There was nothing but darkness inside, like an endless abyss that could swallow all. The sound of his footsteps gradually faded away, gradually becoming inaudible. Like this, his aura completely vanished. The deep darkness was as thick and viscous as ink. As it poured into his nose and mouth, all perception of the outside world was sealed off. Qin Yu didn't know where he was going, but that soft and incomparably terrifying aura that covered him still existed. Thus, he could only silently move forwards. During this process, the Goliath sovereign didn't speak again. But Qin Yu knew that his eyes had always been on him. Moreover, as time passed, it became hotter and hotter, like a starving beast that had seen a delicious prey. He could almost hear the Goliath sovereign's deep and greedy panting in his ears. Just what was the problem? Why had he become the Goliath sovereign's chosen prey? Qin Yu still couldn't figure this out. After all, whether it was destructive power or degree of threat, He was far from being able to compare with the Western wilderness and the Western barbarians. If he was picking up a soft persimmon to pinch, then he could have just killed him. Why go through so much trouble? There must be a deep meaning behind the Goliath sovereign's actions. It wasn't that Qin Yu's will was so strong that he was able to calmly think. It wasn't that he was able to calmly think in such a situation. It was because he could only use this method to prevent himself from falling into a state of panic. Bathed in darkness, his future uncertain. In addition to those greedy and blazing eyes, anyone would panic. This was not something that could be refuted. Suddenly, a low rumbling sound rang out in the darkness. It sounded like a heavy object rolling on the ground. Qin, you could even feel the tremors coming from the ground. His complexion changed. Little fellow, for countless years you have been the only visitor here. Come on in. This was an invitation, but it was clear that Qin Yu didn't have the qualifications to refuse. He couldn't avoid it. He took a deep breath and continued to move forwards. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. When the 4th step fell, the endless darkness in front of him was like fog that was exposed to the blazing sun, rapidly receding like a tide. The light fell into Qin Yu's eyes. Although it wasn't very bright, it still brought a sour feeling to him. His eyes were red and blurry. He blinked, forcefully blinking again and again. Only then was he just barely able to see everything in front of him. The grand and boundless hall was like a palace where a spiritual god lived. It was vast and imposing, and just looking at it made one feel endless awe from the depths of their hearts. There was a massive throne with 2 black dragons intertwining to form the back of it. A figure sat up, his eyes shining as they fell onto Qin Yu. There was no reason for Qin Yu to know who he was the moment he saw him. This person was the master of the Emperor Tomb, Goliath's sovereign, and in this hall he wasn't the only one. There were many long tables placed on both sides, and behind each table sat a figure. No, it was more accurate to say that behind the long tables were stone statues that were half alive. The reason they were half alive was because the heads of these stone statues had cracked and fallen off, revealing the dried flesh and blood underneath. As for the chest and below, they were still gray stone. At this time, these half-alive stone statues were staring straight at Qin Yu. Their atoms apple-bobbed up and down, and the sound of swallowing could be heard. "Your Majesty, is he your prey? Since you brought him here, why don't you let me eat him? Perhaps then I can completely revive." Behind a long table, a large Goliath man stared at Qin Yu and swallowed his saliva as he loudly roared. A burst of laughter echoed through the hall. But although they were laughing, their eyes were icy cold, as if they were saying, "Let me eat him." On the throne of the black dragon, the Goliath sovereign faintly smiled. "Ninth Mountain, this little fellow is not to be eaten, because all of our hopes of reviving rests on his shoulders." The hall fell silent. The laughing, half-alive stone statues stared at Qin Yu, disbelief in their eyes. "Your Majesty, you mean? Yes, he is the person I have been waiting for." The Goliath sovereign's voice resonated. His eyes shrouded Qin Yu, burning with greed and passion, as if he were looking at a peerless treasure. Bang! A berserk aura shot up into the sky. The entire hall seemed to have transformed into a raging sea of raging waves. All of the half-alive stone statues behind the long tables seemed to go crazy. With loud cracking sounds, cracks began to appear on the surface of their bodies. Dark red and viscous fluids slowly flowed out from these cracks, like tears of blood. It had been far, far too long. In addition to the long slumber they had been in, it had been so long that they didn't even know how long they had waited. When hope suddenly appeared in front of them, no one could remain calm. They needed to vent. The Goliath sovereign lifted a hand and pointed forward. In the darkness behind him, a light suddenly shined. A halo of light appeared, protecting Qin Yu within it so that he wouldn't be impacted by the outside forces. "I know that you are all excited, but you must restrain yourself. You and I have waited for countless years to finally meet this little fellow. If we kill him because of a moment of excitement, wouldn't that be turning to sorrow?" The wild waves of attacks in the hall slowly calmed down. All of the half-alive stone statues behind the long tables looked at the Goliath sovereign with burning eyes. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" The Goliath sovereign smiled. He waved his hand. "Yes, you do not need to wait any longer. The time has come. Go and kill everyone here. Use their flesh and blood as a guide to pave the road to our revival." Roar, roar. With a roar, a strong wind swept through the hall. The half-alive stone statues behind the long tables vanished like smoke. Chapter 1499. In the blink of an eye, only the barbaric emperor and Chinyu remained within this grand and majestic palace. He sat high on the throne of the Black Dragon Emperor, his demeanor calm and unruffled. He looked at Chinyu, vividly displaying the words condescending. "There's still some time. Little fellow, don't you want to ask anything?" Chinyu nodded. "Yes." The corners of Barbarian Emperor's mouth curled up. He changed his posture and said, "Ask away. I'm in a good mood today. I'll tell you everything I can." Chinyu said, "Can you release me first? In this grand hall, I believe that your Majesty Barbaric Sovereign wouldn't worry about me escaping, right? Even a lion uses its full strength to capture a rabbit, so you should maintain your current appearance. This is good for both of us." Chinyu frowned for a moment before composing himself. "First question, will I die?" Seemingly not expecting that Zhang Xian would ask about this matter, the Barbarian Emperor's eyebrows shot up slightly. "Yes." The answer was concise and powerful. Chinyu's frown deepened. "Then why would I ask about anything else? After all, we're all going to die." The Barbarian Emperor's finger lightly tapped on the throne of the Black Dragon. "That's true. You have the right to enjoy your final moments of peace, if you wish to." He closed his eyes, no longer looking at Chinyu. The hall fell into silence. "I have a question," Chinyu said with a sullen expression. The Barbarian Emperor opened his eyes, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. "Speak," Chinyu said, "as the last emperor of the ancient Man Kingdom. Why have you been trapped in this tomb until today?" The Barbarian Emperor said, "You misunderstood. I wasn't trapped in this tomb, but this tomb saved me as well as them." Chinyu said, "I don't understand." The Barbarian Emperor said, "A very long time ago, when I was still alive, I tried to defy the heavens and change my fate to truly reach the Emperor realm. If they succeeded, then the rise of the Berserkers would be unstoppable. Even if they gathered all the power in the world, they would not be able to stop them. Unfortunately, I failed in the end. As a loser, I was killed. Of course, it was inevitable. The only thing worth rejoicing over is that before the final battle, I already had a bad premonition, and I set up my plans beforehand. I did not hesitate to use up a large amount of the Berserkers' kismet to build this mausoleum. That's why they and I were able to return to the mausoleum and revive after so many years." These words revealed a great deal of information. Chinyu's eyes flashed. This should be a top secret, but the Western Wilds and the Western Barbarians both know of this. Why? A hint of admiration flashed in the Barbarian Sovereign's eyes. "You are indeed a smart little fellow, to actually be able to notice this. That's right, this matter is indeed a top secret. Even if they were resurrected in this Emperor's mausoleum, they wouldn't know that I had secretly built this place before they died. As for those people you mentioned, the reason why they know about this is because I want them to know." Chinyu said in a low voice, "Use yourself as bait." That's right. The admiration in the Barbarian Sovereign's eyes became even stronger. Going from death to life is an incomparably difficult thing, and it is truly a heaven-defying act. Even though he had prepared this mausoleum, when he actually started, he realized that it was full of dangers. "I have no choice but to seek help from the outside world. Only the opportunity to step into the Emperor realm is attractive enough. Qin Yu smiled bitterly. So the so-called Western wilds and the Western barbarians were just pawns lured into the chessboard. The ruler of the Western wilds had mocked the barbarian sovereign of the past for becoming a drowning dog that had to hide from place to place. But perhaps all of this was just the appearance that the barbarian sovereign wanted them to see. In reality, they were the real prey. This emperor's mausoleum was a trap. At this moment, Qin Yu suddenly realized why he had become a target. He raised his head and stared at the barbarian sovereign. Divine nation? The barbarian sovereign nodded. So you do know. There was a hint of surprise in his voice that couldn't be concealed. He looked Qin Yu up and down. With your realm, you are far from the Emperor realm. You don't have the qualifications to come into contact with this level. So I am very curious. How did you know about the existence of Divine Nation? Qin Yu said in a low voice, I am willing to tell everything I know, barbarian sovereign. I wonder if you can exchange it for my life? The barbarian sovereign hesitated for a moment. He shook his head. It's too late. I have already given the order to attack. The preparations will soon be completed. There is no time to try anything else. Qin Yu didn't know what the preparations the barbarian sovereign spoke of were. But he could feel that beneath the calm exterior of the barbarian sovereign, his emotions were becoming increasingly hot. In other words, he didn't have much time left. He couldn't beat around the bush anymore. Qin Yu took a deep breath. He lifted a hand and pointed forward. His movements were slow, as if he were afraid that if he moved even a little faster, he would detonate the strength that wrapped around his body. Just now I saw your majesty attack. There seemed to be something in the darkness behind you. I wonder if barbarian sovereign can let me see it before I die? The hall fell silent once more. The barbarian sovereign had a thoughtful expression. After several breaths of time, he flicked his sleeves. Fine. There is no harm in letting you see. The darkness began to ripple like water. A palace lantern flew out. It was simple and luxurious. The lantern quietly burned within, emitting a faint light. This lantern is the bait to draw them here. In truth, what I said isn't wrong. It is indeed a supreme treasure. It can give someone a 30% chance of breaking into the sovereign realm. If they can smoothly swallow me, they will have a 70% chance of success. Qin Yu stared at the palace lantern that flew out from the darkness. He swore that he had to use all of his acting skills and self-restraint to not lose his composure on the spot. Even so, his face stiffened and his heartbeat quickened. This was because Qin Yu had seen this palace lantern before. It could even be said that in this world he was the person who was most familiar with it. There was no one else. A foot of deep blue light, the little blue lamp. That's right, although its true form was only the size of a thumb. What he saw in front of him was the enlarged version of the little blue lamp. He had tried countless times to decipher the secrets of the little blue lamp. All of its lines and traces had been firmly engraved in his heart, never once forgotten. Thus, Qin Yu was certain that he hadn't seen wrong. The palace lantern in front of him looked exactly the same as the little blue lamp. At most, some of the lines of this palace lantern were a bit stiff when they turned and intersected. They weren't as lifelike and natural as the little blue lamp. But there was one thing without a doubt, and that was that there was a close relationship between them. The Goliath sovereign leaned forward, his eyes covering Qin Yu. Your heartbeat is quite fast, and your expression is a bit stiff. Have you seen it before? Qin Yu shook his head. He slowly said, I just never thought that there would be such a treasure in this world. A lamp can reverse life and death, and even prop up the entire emperor tomb. A sharp light flashed in the Goliath sovereign's eyes. You can sense it. Qin Yu forced a smile. The Goliath sovereign already knows that I built my own divine kingdom. It shouldn't be a secret that I discovered this, right? Oh, that's right. The Goliath sovereign nodded. He leaned back against the black dragon emperor throne. Then, in the next moment, he lifted a hand and grasped forwards. Qin Yu stuffily coughed and was pulled into the air by an invisible strength. Goliath Sovereign, you are lying. You recognize this lamp. Little fellow, you have really given me a great surprise. The Goliath Sovereign lifted a hand and pulled Qin Yu deep into the palace. It's about time. I don't want to wait any longer. Let me see just what you are hiding. Qin Yu struggled with all his strength. His face flushed red, but he couldn't break free at all. He could only watch helplessly as he approached the Goliath Sovereign on the Black Dragon Emperor throne. The other party's eyes became incomparably fiery, revealing a naked desire to devour without the slightest bit of concealment. Close! Close! The Goliath Sovereign suddenly opened his mouth at an astonishing angle. It was like a bottomless pit, and a powerful swallowing strength covered Qin Yu. He wanted to swallow Qin Yu in a single gulp, but in his original plan, this wasn't what he had planned. But Qin Yu's performance had caused the Goliath Sovereign to change his mind. Although swallowing Qin Yu alive was risky and would cause his resurrection plan to be imperfect, the Goliath Sovereign was willing to bear all consequences when compared to what Qin Yu had revealed. If he could really obtain something and unravel the secret of this palace lamp, the Goliath Sovereign believed that he would be able to open the door to a whole new world. At that time, what he could obtain wouldn't just be resurrection. He might even reach an unprecedented level and become the true great emperor of the Goliath race, leading the Goliath race to rise. In the cage, Qin Yu's face was filled with anger and panic. His entire face was flushed red, but in the depths of his eyes there was calmness, because this was the situation he had wanted to begin with. The moment he saw the palace lamp, Qin Yu decided to gamble. So, when he tried his best to control his emotions, he revealed a trace of stiffness. The Goliath Sovereign brazenly attacked. He had decided to swallow Qin Yu alive and obtain everything he had. But he didn't know that this was a dangerous move that he had made in a desperate situation. Because of this palace lamp, and also because of the Goliath Sovereign's current state. Although on the surface he was in a normal state, the truth was that the Goliath Sovereign in front of him was the same as the stone statues behind the long table. He was also in a half-alive state. When the darkness was broken and the palace lamp flew out, Qin Yu confirmed this. Of course, he was even more certain that the current Goliath Sovereign was in an incomparably weak state. The reason he was able to summon this seemingly unstoppable strength was all because of the palace lamp behind him. In other words, as long as he could break the connection between the Goliath Sovereign and this palace lamp, he could seize the initiative or even take a step further. If he could seize this palace lamp, that would be the same as controlling the entire Emperor Tomb. Just as Qin Yu was about to be swallowed by the Goliath Sovereign, there was a sudden tremor within his body. The flow of time around him instantly changed. It was like someone had pressed a pause button in space, causing it to fall into a stagnant state. But this only lasted for an extremely short period of time. With a faint cracking sound in his ears, everything that had stopped began to flow once more. But it was still countless times slower than before. Blood flowed out from every orifice of Qin Yu's head. This was the powerful backlash caused by the time laws being broken. He knew that he only had one chance to attack. He stared at the Goliath Sovereign and let out a loud roar. In the next moment, Qin Yu's appearance changed and his aura changed along with it. In this hall, 2 Goliath Sovereigns had appeared. The terrifying strength that imprisoned Qin Yu suddenly loosened. The peacefully burning flames in the palace lamp leapt up. It was as if it was confused as to why there were 2 auras that had been recognized. Imitation supernatural ability. The Goliath Sovereign roared. His eyes revealed shock, but it soon turned into cruel killing intent. It's useless. I am the sovereign of the Goliath race. Although you can simulate appearances, you don't know the source of my Goliath race. Look clearly, I am your master. Kill him. With a loud roar, the flesh on the Goliath Sovereign's forehead split open and 2 sharp horns drilled out. His aura began to boil, and the flames in the palace lamp leapt even more intensely. Qin Yu could feel the strength imprisoning him tightening once more. But at this moment, before Qin Yu could respond, the abyssal titan bloodline in his body seemed to sense something, and it suddenly began to stir restlessly. Kacha! Kacha! Black scales began to appear on the surface of his flesh at an astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, they covered his entire body. Qin Yu's eyes had turned pitch black at this moment, and they were filled with boundless ruthlessness and destruction as he stared fixedly at the barbarian emperor before him. Ancient Goliath! Impossible! You are clearly a human. So how could you have such a pure ancient Goliath aura? The Goliath sovereign roared in anger. He glanced at the palace lamp. The flickering flames within were clearly leaning towards Qin Yu. Bang! A bright light suddenly erupted, covering the Goliath sovereign and Qin Yu. In the next moment, the world around them changed, and they appeared in an endless desert. The palace lamp vanished from sight. High above their heads was a burning sun, recklessly sprinkling down endless light and heat. The moment Qin Yu saw this sun above his head, something within his body seemed to shatter. Roar! With a loud roar, his body began to wildly expand. With loud crackling sounds, his flesh and blood began to explode. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into an abyssal titan. An ancient aura flowed out from his body, bringing with it an endless wild aura. The Goliath sovereign's eyes were cold. He stepped forwards, and endless yellow sand exploded outwards, forming a massive bottomless pit. When the endless grains of sand fell down and his line of sight was restored, he had already transformed into a terrifying giant with 2 horns on his head. Without the slightest hesitation, the 2 huge figures under the light of the sun began to madly fight each other, accompanied by the rumbling of the ground. At this moment, the entire desert trembled. Trillions of grains of sand were struck by a terrifying strength, howling through the air as they shot out in all directions. Blood splashed out. Broken scales and large chunks of torn flesh fell onto the yellow sand, dyeing everything red. There was no method, no dodging, no skill, and so on. There was only a brutal frontal collision and slaughter. Only when one side fell would the battle end. Suddenly, the Goliath sovereign's giant body with 2 horns was sent flying far away. With a heaven-shaking explosion, he crashed into the ground. He flipped himself up and roared into the skies. The entire desert shook, and the dazzling sun in the skies erupted with an extremely bright light. In the next moment, a massive beam of light fell from the skies. But its target wasn't the Goliath sovereign, but the abyssal titan. It was clear that it had made its choice. Seeing this, the Goliath sovereign's giant eyes revealed disbelief. He didn't think that the treasure that the Goliath tribe worshipped would abandon him, the true Goliath sovereign. Beneath the beam of light, the injuries suffered by the abyssal titan rapidly healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Golden lines appeared on the surface of his scales, as if he were wearing a suit of golden armor. At this moment, he was like a god descending to the mortal world. The abyssal titan took a step and punched out. A wild strength instantly crossed space and smashed into the Goliath sovereign's chest. With a heaven-shaking explosion, the Goliath sovereign's giant body tumbled backwards. Blood splashed out in all directions, and a hole appeared in his chest. Where his heart had been, there was nothing left. Chapter 1500. In the desert, under the blazing sun, the barbarian emperor's huge body suddenly turned into powder. The emperor of the ancient barbarian kingdom, an emperor realm powerhouse who had been resurrected, had died, although the barbarian emperor was in an absolutely weak state when he was killed. Qin Yu had still managed to kill him. How many people in the 9 regions of the Great Desolation had managed to do this? From this perspective, Qin Yu could be ranked among the top of the world. Of course, Qin Yu didn't have the time to think about this. He couldn't even think about it. That was because the moment the barbarian emperor died, the Abyss Titan bloodline in his body went berserk and forcefully took over control of his body. The abyss titan took a step forward, opened its mouth, and inhaled fiercely. Rumble! In an instant, it was as if a great river had burst its banks. The terrifying devouring power wrapped around the barbarian emperor's body and swallowed it. In the next moment, Qin Yu regained control of his body. However, before he could do anything, a majestic thought exploded in his mind and drowned his consciousness. The towering mountain rose steeply from the ground like a giant sword. It pierced through the layers of clouds and pointed to the endless sky above his head. A stone path was built around the mountain. It was forcefully excavated by manpower, turning the natural barrier into a passageway that connected the ground and the peak of the mountain. Countless tall and burly barbarians stood on both sides of the stone steps. They quickly looked up and saw the peak of the mountain that seemed to have been shaved off. A huge stone wall stood on the peak of the mountain. Countless words were engraved on it. They were blurry and indecipherable, but one could understand their meaning. However, the stone wall seemed to be covered by an invisible force, making it impossible to see it clearly. One could only see the words barbarian kingdom, heaven worship, cauldron setting, pilgrimage. Next to the stone wall, there were countless tall figures. Each of them was dozens of feet tall, and the closer they were to the stone wall, the taller they were. A golden-armored barbarian stepped forward and half knelt in front of the stone wall, chanting something. Rumble! Above their heads, the wind and clouds surged, followed closely by a torrential downpour. Thunderclaps pierced through the sky. All of this seemed to be stopping something, or perhaps it was expressing its opposition through this method. The golden-armored barbarian frowned. The slightest change in his expression made people feel as if a mountain was pressing down on them, and they almost stopped breathing. He stood up, looked up at the sky, and suddenly pulled out his sword. As a result, the wind dispersed, the clouds dispersed, and the rain stopped. All the roaring thunder and lightning disappeared without a trace. In the blue sky that reappeared, a terrifying scar appeared, starting from the south and ending in the north. This sword slashed open the sky. Shwa! The golden-armored barbarian turned around and raised his sword. The barbarians will never be slaves! A grand and huge city was under construction. Countless tall and burly barbarian tribe members were swinging their long whips to order more human cultivators to move huge stones and thick logs. Hurry up! Faster! Whoever dares to slack off will not have a good ending. Before the end of the month, you must complete the construction of the imperial capital. If you miss the date of establishing the nation, you will all die. As the barbarians roared, whips rose and fell from time to time. Each time a human cultivator was whipped to the ground, blood and flesh flying out. A boy that hadn't even reached adulthood was whipped to the ground. His body was covered with scars. This whip had scattered the last of his strength. He fell to the ground, his body violently twitching. Blood gushed out from his nose and mouth. My son! The middle-aged man beside him had blood-red eyes. He roared out loud and stomped his feet. The ground beneath him shattered, and he shot into the skies. I'll fight you to the death. The strong barbarian that whipped the boy only sneered upon seeing this. He didn't care at all about the middle-aged man that was rushing towards him with crazed, killing intent. In the next moment, black shackles appeared, wrapping around the man's entire body. They wildly contracted and tore through his flesh and blood, directly tearing him apart and dismembering him. For a time, massive chunks of flesh and blood rained down. The smell of blood was overwhelming. Countless human cultivators clenched their teeth as they looked at this scene, but none of them dared to resist. They could only hear the wild laughter of the barbarians. Retribution, this is your retribution. All humans deserve to die. On the battlefield, countless human cultivators engaged in a brutal slaughter with the barbarians. The light of supernatural powers was like a meteor, piercing through the endless skies and sprinkling down. Tall and large barbarians were pierced through. They roared as they fell to the ground. Blood recklessly flowed down the ravines in the ground, gathering into dark red rivulets that finally dyed the earth red. As a massive number of barbarians died, they fell into a disadvantageous position in this war. But they didn't surrender. Rather, they stimulated their last bit of cruelty and brutality. Bang! There was a thunderous explosion. A barbarian that had his body pierced through by a crossbow rushed into the midst of human cultivators and blew himself up, his flesh, blood, and bones, under the infusion of a terrifying strength, turned into sharp weapons that wildly swept out in all directions, dragging all the surrounding human cultivators into the grave with him. The battlefield finally quieted down. All the barbarians died on the spot. None of them chose to retreat. The human cultivators that obtained the final victory looked at the battlefield that was torn apart by a terrifying strength and cried out in victory. As the fleeing barbarian troops retreated to a barren land, eagles flew in the skies, occasionally letting out desolate and desolate cries. There were people who continuously fell, losing their breath, becoming departed souls on this path of escape. No one tried to support these fallen people, because the barbarians were well aware that since they had fallen, it was impossible for them to stand up again. Their numb faces and empty eyes could only reflect the pale, white sun above their heads, as well as the endless and hopeful road ahead. Even so, the pursuit of the humans didn't stop. They chased after the retreating troops, determined to bleed the last drop of barbarian blood. Rumble, rumble, the earth rumbled. The source of this sound came from behind them. The pursuers had arrived once more. On the horizon, a massive number of warriors appeared atop their war horses. They wore black armor and were like eternal darkness that could swallow all. Even if the sun shined on their bodies, it would only end up being sucked away. Kill! With a roar, the black-armored riders swept forwards like a raging wave. The fleeing barbarian troops didn't stop. They continued to advance towards their destination that they didn't know when they would stop. But the strong adult warriors amongst them stopped on their own initiative and went against the flow. They gathered together, their empty eye sockets burning with raging flames once more. They no longer hoped that they could kill their enemies. They only hoped that they could use their own lives and blood to exchange for a chance of survival for their retreating tribesmen. After a moment, the slaughter on the battlefield ended. The black-armored riders had only paid a small price to kill all the barbarians that blocked their way. Countless corpses littered the ground. Continue forward. Don't spare a single one. Rumble, rumble. The black-armored riders organized their troops. Like a tide, they rushed towards the direction the barbarians had fled in. Chapter 1501. In the boundless black sea, raging waves tumbled and tumbled. In the pitch-black sky, thunder and lightning streaked across the horizon from time to time. Ships broke through the overlapping waves and moved forward. Lightning exploded above their heads, illuminating the sorrowful faces of the berserkers on the deck. The 13 tribes of the berserkers had more than 100 million people under their command, but only a tenth of them had managed to enter the Black Sea alive. Even so, they still could not escape from the nightmare. The lightning above their heads was the pursuit of the human cultivators, and the roaring and rampaging Black Sea was the evil mouth that wanted to devour them. Ah! Screams of pain rose. A damaged ship could not withstand the attacks from the huge waves. As it wailed, the ship crumbled and disintegrated, turning into countless pieces of driftwood. All the berserkers on the ship fell into the sea. Lightning flashed, revealing their struggling figures. Soon they became stiff, and like stones, they sank into the depths of the sea. This was not the beginning of the tragedy, nor was it the end of the ceremony. It was just one of the scenes that could be seen at any moment in the nightmare. The berserkers who had crossed the Black Sea to fight for their last chance of survival continued to fall into death. They could not see the end of their voyage, and they did not know when it would end. Rumble! A loud sound rang in the sky. Terrifying thunder exploded, and countless bolts of lightning tore through the sky like waterfalls. They struck the tumbling sea, and several ships that were enveloped by the lightning were destroyed and disintegrated. The ship with black smoke rising from its body tilted and crashed into the sand by the sea. Half of the ship had already been destroyed, and it was submerged in the sea. If one looked up, they could see many ships in similar conditions. They were parked crookedly on the coastline. The berserkers who staggered off the ship knelt down on the ground. Their faces were filled with excitement, and they picked up the soil to kiss the ground. But after the excitement and ecstasy faded away, all that was left was endless sorrow and pain, because only a small portion of the berserkers who had successfully crossed the Black Sea and arrived at the legendary land. Most of the berserkers had died in the Black Sea. After the grief and wail subsided, the berserkers reorganized their troops. They elected a new leader and reorganized the remaining berserkers. Then, once the berserkers brought the remaining resources, they split into 4 groups and headed in different directions. This was the bloody experience that the berserkers had learned from their great escape. When faced with an unknown situation, they had to spread out their tribe members. Even if some of them met with misfortune, the others could survive. This was to ensure that the legacy of the berserkers would not be completely cut off. There were countless terrifying creatures living in the new land. The barbarians who had invaded the land licked their wounds while working hard to establish their tribes and survive. Harboring hatred for the past, they began a new cycle of reproduction and life. Due to the protection of the terrifying Black Sea, the barbarians obtained precious time to catch their breath in this abandoned land. However, the human cultivators did not stop their pursuit. They tried all sorts of methods in an attempt to completely destroy the berserkers. After a long time, the human cultivators finally succeeded. They pierced through the barrier of time and space and planted a cold, poisonous thorn in the core of the land of berserkers. It began to multiply and grow. In the end, it turned into a source of disaster that would devour and destroy the berserkers from within. It was like a gigantic, poisonous sore, and as time passed by, it became more terrifying bit by bit. The berserkers decided to destroy this poisonous thorn, and because of it, another long and terrifying battle between the berserkers and human cultivators began. In the darkness, a voice suddenly echoed out. It wasn't loud, but it carried with it a will and strength that shook the soul. Remember your mission. Never forget it. Even if you die, even if you sink into oblivion, you must always remember this. The barbarians will never be slaves. Emperor Mausoleum. Grand Hall. On the throne of the Black Dragon, Qin Yu stuffily coughed. His head felt as if it were splitting apart. It was like countless thick wooden thorns were ruthlessly stabbing into his brain. His body violently trembled. Blood gushed out from his nose and mouth, dripping onto his hands and gradually dyeing his knuckles and palms red. Hum! A humming sound was released from around Qin Yu. A warm and soft light covered his figure. It was like a gentle stream of water washing over his body, slowly soothing the pain he was currently suffering. His mind gradually eased. He gasped for breath and opened his eyes with difficulty. Then he saw the palace lantern in his hands. It quietly burned, as if it were saying something, giving him a feeling of intimacy. His mind continued to twitch. Every tremble brought with it a faint stabbing pain. His chaotic thoughts gradually calmed down. Qin Yu closed his eyes and couldn't help but gently rub between his eyebrows. He was sorting out the information that had appeared in his mind. Then he discovered an unbelievable fact. People really couldn't casually eat anything they wanted. For instance, right now, because of Qin Yu's gluttony, he had brought upon himself a great deal of trouble. Barbarian sovereign. He was the barbarian sovereign. The barbarian sovereign was Qin Yu. He didn't need to be crowned, nor did he need the approval of the barbarians. He was the barbarian sovereign. This was because Qin Yu had fused with the legacy mark of the barbarians and had obtained the approval of the palace lantern, becoming the new master of the imperial tomb. Without a doubt, he was the barbarian sovereign. Moreover, he was the last remaining sovereign of the entire barbarian race. He had to shoulder the responsibility of reviving the barbarian tribes. "Stone pagoda!" Qin Yu shouted out loud. At this time, he didn't feel the least bit of joy from becoming the barbarian sovereign. Instead, there was only endless panic and pressure. The world of cultivators was filled with hardships. To be able to survive alone was an incomparably difficult matter. He didn't believe that he could shoulder this heavy burden, so his first thought was whether or not he could resolve this problem. "Master, I can roughly see what happened to you, but this brand that is engraved in the bloodline of the entire race and has been condensed for tens of thousands of years cannot be dissolved. At least, I definitely can't do this. Also, I have to remind Master that since you have fused with the brand, it is a part of you. It is your belief and obsession in this life. If you resist and try to change anything, it is very likely that it will cause the brand to collapse and backfire." Qin Yu's complexion paled. "Speak simply. Simply speaking, if you continue like this, you will kill yourself." After the stone pagoda finished speaking, it stopped breathing. It was clearly afraid that it would vent its anger on Qin Yu. Qin Yu! He had escaped from death, killed the last barbarian sovereign, and became the new master of the imperial tomb. This should have been a joyous event. But who knew what sort of madness the abyssal Titan bloodline had suddenly gone berserk and swallowed it clean. Then, such a vexing matter had occurred. He had become the barbarian sovereign. If he had seen the scenes in the mark, then that would have been fine. Perhaps Qin Yu had thought that he could use the strength of the barbarians to become stronger as soon as possible. But the human cultivators were still relentlessly hunting him down. Once he became the barbarian sovereign, he would inevitably become a target to be eliminated. Although he wasn't completely sure about the 9 regions of the Great Desolate and the barbarians, his intuition told him that things were as he thought they were. This world was far more terrifying than he had imagined. Once he became the barbarian sovereign, he would face an impossible challenge and eventually be destroyed. This thought was so intense that Qin Yu immediately wanted to break free from this connection. Whoever wanted to be the barbarian sovereign could be the barbarian sovereign. If the stone pagoda couldn't do anything, then who could he ask for guidance from? Qin Yu thought of the Lord Ruler. The reason he entered the Western Desolate, the reason he came to this imperial tomb, and the reason he fell into such a miserable and desperate situation was all because of her. Now that there was a problem, he naturally had to find her to solve it. With a thought, Qin Yu was about to summon the Lord Ruler. But at this time his movements froze and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. The Lord Ruler wanted him to enter the Western Desolate Emperor tomb in order to obtain a treasure from the Western Desolate Emperor and use it to break into the half-barbarian sovereign realm. Qin Yu had already determined that if he wanted to become a half-barbarian sovereign, just relying on a treasure wasn't enough. He needed the barbarian sovereign himself as a medium, and now he seemed to have gathered all the conditions with the palace lantern in hand. He had inexplicably become the barbarian sovereign. In other words, if he summoned the Lord Ruler, she only needed to open her mouth and swallow him, and everything would be fine. Does this count as me sacrificing myself? Although he had the palace lantern in hand and the imperial tomb was under his control, as he thought of the Lord Ruler's blurry face, Qin Yu felt uncertain. He wasn't confident he could block the Lord Ruler's mouth. He took a deep breath and suppressed all his thoughts. Then he made a decision. He couldn't summon the Lord Ruler, at least not now. Then, besides her, was there anyone else he could ask? Hesitation flashed in his eyes, but at this time he couldn't care too much. Even if he knew there might be serious repercussions, he could only take the risk. Qin Yu closed his eyes. From the depths of his heart, he sent out a summon to the mysterious existence hidden in the distant space-time. Perhaps it was because he was in the imperial tomb, or perhaps it was because he was in the great desolate world. But the response to this summon was much slower than before. Just as Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows and was about to give up, a warm and gentle voice echoed in his ears. "It's been a long time. You finally thought of summoning me. Qin Yu. Who? A breath blew into his ear, bringing with it bursts of fragrance. Qin Yu's figure moved. He quickly took several steps forwards. As he turned around, he saw a small red mouth calmly floating in the air. Seeing Qin Yu's reaction, this mouth curled up in dissatisfaction. Qin Yu, don't forget that you are the one who summoned me on your own initiative. Is this your attitude? Humph humph. If you continue like this, I will leave. From these words, Qin Yu could feel a bit of a spoiled tone. He immediately felt a headache coming on. But at this time, he wasn't in the mood to speak any further. He took a deep breath and said, Your Excellency, I need your help. He went straight to the point. This was because Qin Yu couldn't guarantee that if he delayed any longer, his fusion with the Goliath inheritance mark wouldn't become increasingly firm. Naturally, the sooner the better. Chapter 1502. Her small red lips gently pouted. She seemed to sense Qin Yu's nervousness and unease, but she didn't say anything else. What is it? Qin Yu said, There are some changes in my body. Did you notice it? If he didn't even know what was happening, the possibility of solving the problem was minuscule. Yes, I saw it. You are in trouble. After a pause, her mouth moved as if she was nodding up and down. Very big trouble. Qin Yu snorted, and his complexion didn't look good. Although his intuition told him that it was not a good thing to be contaminated by the barbarians, when this was confirmed by the mysterious existence hidden in space and time, his mood became even worse. Today I asked you to come here in the hope that you can help me solve this trouble. After a slight pause, Qin Yu clenched his teeth. For this, I am willing to pay a sufficient price. Really? Her small mouth opened slightly, revealing an unconcealable surprise. It was as if she had seen a plate of delicious food placed in front of her. Qin Yu suppressed the discomfort in his heart. Of course. He took a deep breath. What do you want? I want half of your soul. Qin Yu furrowed his brows. Although he knew that he would take this opportunity to extort him, he was still given a fright. Half of his soul. If he really handed it over, would he still be him? Even if he was still him, he wouldn't be able to decide whether he would live or die in the future. If this was really the case, Qin Yu would rather fight against fate or try other methods. I cannot agree to this condition. Either you change it or you can go back. Qin Yu's eyes focused. He stared straight at the mouth that was quietly floating in front of him, using his expression to express his serious attitude. He didn't have time to look at it just now, but now that he looked carefully, he found that this beautiful little mouth had a glossy surface. It was as if before Qin Yu summoned it, it was enjoying a delicious meal. This mysterious existence needed to eat? What was it eating? It seemed delicious. Oh, I want to taste it. Qin Yu's complexion changed slightly. His slightly chaotic thoughts instantly became clear. He took a step back and looked straight ahead. His eyes became cold. What did you do? It was clear that in such a tense moment, it was impossible for Qin Yu to be in the mood to think about such random things. For such a situation to occur, he must have been affected by some external force. Without a doubt, the only one who had the ability and motive to accomplish this silently was the man before him. Sensing the chill emanating from Qin Yu's body, she lightly coughed and said, What did you say? I don't understand at all. This voice was as innocent as it could be. Qin Yu took a deep breath. He said, It seems that summoning you here today was not a wise decision. Please return. Don't. I was just joking with you because the atmosphere is so tense. It's not a big deal. Isn't it just helping you get rid of the brand of the berserkers that has fused into your body? I can do it in minutes. I'll give you a friendly discount. I was joking when I said half of the soul just now. He laughed awkwardly and smacked his lips a few times. A soul of the Emperor realm. Am I sincere enough this time? It was obvious that this was a new condition that he had made. Qin Yu almost choked on his saliva. Although he had just killed the Berserker Emperor, this guy turned into ashes after he died. He did not even see his soul. If Qin Yu were to find another soul of the Emperor realm from somewhere else, or to put it more bluntly, to kill the Emperor himself, he might as well be more straightforward and cut his own throat. Emperor realm, do you think it's cabbage on the roadside? You can kill it with a casual slash. Qin Yu shook his head. Impossible. It's no different from suicide for me to find trouble with the Emperor realm. Qin Yu, don't forget that you're the one asking me to do something. I can't do this or that. Don't be so reckless just because I like you. Try it on someone else. I would have turned around and left long ago. I don't have the time to talk nonsense here, he said indignantly, revealing a row of cute white teeth. Qin Yu still shook his head. I'm sorry, but I can't do it. I can only refuse. Okay, then I'll give you an option that you can easily do. I see that the palace lantern in your hand is quite beautiful, and my palace just happens to lack such a thing to light up. Offer this palace lantern to me, and I'll help you. Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. If he was right, this was the true goal of the mysterious existence hidden in space and time. From the very beginning, his goal was the palace lantern, the so-called half of the soul, or Qin Yu sacrificing the soul of an emperor realm. He must have guessed that Qin Yu would never agree. On the surface, he was retreating again and again, but now he revealed his true goal. He wanted to give Qin Yu the illusion that he had already taken a great advantage and that he should not try to bargain anymore. This palace lantern clearly had some kind of close connection with the little blue lamp. It must be a very important treasure. But at this moment, compared to his own safety, it wasn't that he couldn't give it up. In addition, there was another important reason that made Qin Yu make this decision. It was that the little blue lamp had remained silent. If this palace lantern was indeed incomparably important, then the little blue lamp, which was closely related to it, would have reacted long ago. It wouldn't have continued to remain silent like it was now. But the truth was that Qin Yu's judgment was gravely mistaken. But this was a matter for the future, so let's not mention it for now. He glanced at the oily little mouth across from him. He took a deep breath and nodded. All right, I agree. Pa. There was a light sound, as if someone were clapping in excitement. But soon, they seemed to realize something and hurriedly restrained their emotions. Since you agree, then give me the palace lantern. I can immediately help you and free you from this whirlpool of trouble. Qin Yu reached out a hand and grasped the palace lantern. He pulled it back to his side and shook his head. A normal transaction should be that you help me solve this problem first, and then I will give you the palace lantern, right? Otherwise, if I give you the treasure and I can't solve the problem, who am I supposed to reason with? Humph, humph. You don't trust me. You and I do need to communicate more in order to establish a more stable relationship of mutual trust. These words were tactful, but the meaning was clear. What you said was right. The oily little mouth clenched its teeth and hatefully said, Qin Yu, just you wait. Sooner or later, you will regret treating me with such an attitude. Qin Yu wasn't in the mood to argue with it. Please, the oily little mouth humphed. It instantly disappeared and reappeared, approaching Qin Yu. The two of them were less than a foot apart. His nose and mouth seemed to be able to smell a sweet and alluring scent. This left him a bit uncomfortable. He subconsciously wanted to draw back, but before he could move, he was stopped. Stand here. What are you doing? Can't you see that I am examining you right now? Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. He nodded and didn't speak. The oily little mouth moved closer and closer until it was almost touching Qin Yu's face. Then it moved behind him. He could feel a warm breath on his ear. Time slowly passed, but he still didn't receive a response. Qin Yu's frown deepened. He said in a low voice, You still haven't examined me. Why are you so anxious? Qin Yu, you must remember that the most important thing for young people to do is to have patience. Especially now, in such a critical moment, in such an important matter, you must be cautious and cautious. You cannot be careless. The oily little mouth's words were sincere and earnest, filled with teaching intent. Qin Yu suddenly said, "How much longer do you want to look? You can't just stand there like this. There are other people in this hall. Who knows when they will come back? Don't worry, they won't be back for a while. I'll take a look. You shut up for now." Qin Yu felt a trace of impatience in her voice, and his heart sank. It wasn't that he was worried that he would anger this mysterious existence hidden in space-time, but that Qin Yu suddenly realized a possibility that made him feel uneasy. Could it be no? She was clearly full of confidence, so she must be sure of herself. After another moment, the warm breath finally retreated. Qin Yu took a deep breath. "How is it?" "Qin Yu, I told you for nothing just now. Young people must have patience." The oily little mouth pouted. "Your question is a bit troublesome. I'm afraid I will suffer a loss in this transaction, but I always keep my word. Since I promised you, I will definitely do it. But this matter is difficult, so I need to make some preparations. Wait a moment, I will be back soon." After speaking, the oily little mouth disappeared from sight. Looking at the place where she disappeared, Qin Yu couldn't help but frown. He felt that this matter might not go so smoothly. What was even more terrifying was that he faintly felt that saving the barbarians was a responsibility he was destined to shoulder in this life. Pooey. Impossible, absolutely impossible. How long have I known the barbarians? How could I possibly have such a suicidal thought that doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth? This must be the influence of the barbarian mark. That's right, it must be like this. Qin Yu's complexion became increasingly ugly. It had only been a few days, and the problem had already become so serious. If he allowed the barbarian mark to remain in his body for another period of time, then perhaps it would truly subtly influence Qin Yu's mind, causing him to unknowingly change his mind and willingly shed his blood for the rise of the barbarians. He would become a great barbarian sovereign who would strive to the end of his life. Hiss! No, this is absolutely not the future I want. Qin Yu vigorously shook his head, trying to maintain a clear mind. In the empty hall, time seemed to pass at a particularly slow pace. As Qin Yu couldn't help but worry that the mysterious existence hidden in space and time might have run away because he couldn't handle it, the space beneath the hall began to violently shake. Hum. It gave off a feeling as if some colossus wanted to forcefully squeeze its way in. The palace lantern in Qin Yu's hand began to respond. The flames within began to burn brightly and began to sway. He could clearly sense a powerful restrictive power descending upon the main hall in an instant, about to suppress them. "Stop!" Qin Yu shouted out loud. The palace lantern hesitated for a moment. The flames returned to tranquility, and the fluctuations of strength in the hall vanished from sight. Finally, as the shaking became increasingly intense, a blurry figure appeared with great difficulty. The space around her constantly shattered and condensed, forming a blockade that caused her figure to become blurry and indistinct, making it impossible to see her clearly. The reason he knew it was her was because this figure was too overbearing. Not only was it tall and slender, but it was big when it should be big, thin when it should be thin, plump when it should be round when it should be round. In short, it was perfect. Unless one was blind, they wouldn't be able to see her attributes. Perhaps it was because the process of descending into the imperial mausoleum had consumed too much of his strength, causing him to slightly bend over and gasp for breath. As the sound entered his ears, even though he knew there was nothing, it still caused his mind to fly and endless fantasies to appear. This person was, of course, Qin Yu. He coughed lightly, forcefully dispelling all sorts of inappropriate thoughts in his mind. He said in a low voice, "You've finally returned." He had to say something. Just seeing her and hearing her gasping for breath made him feel as if he couldn't bear it. How could he dare to continue watching like this? "Nonsense, I'm panting right now. Let's talk later." She rolled her eyes at Qin Yu. Although her entire body was blurry from top to bottom, as if she were covered in a thick quilt. This glance still caused the words amorous to pop up in Qin Yu's mind. He was going crazy. Wasn't it said that the mysterious existences hidden in space and time were all incomparably terrifying characters? How could he encounter this type? Could it be that the script was wrong? He didn't dare to look anymore, and there was no reason to continue saying anything. After all, she was panting from exhaustion. It was reasonable for her to have some time to rest. Therefore, Qin Yu could only lower his head slightly and not look at the person in front of him. He tried his best to think of messy things in his mind to distract himself. The reason he did this was because the sound of her panting was too unbearable. Finally, this person recovered. Her first sentence was, "Qin Yu, I've suffered a great loss this time. You have to compensate me properly." Qin Yu swore that he had already tried very hard not to let his imagination run wild. But when he heard the sentence, he instantly drove the car astray. The corner of his mouth twitched. He took a deep breath and said, "You, please make your move." Chapter 1503. Control your breath. Calm your mind. Sit down. He lifted a hand. "I am about to begin." Qin Yu sat down cross-legged. In the next moment, a cool finger touched between his eyebrows. His mind trembled, and he immediately fell into a daze. But at the same time, his consciousness was in a clear state. For example, Qin Yu could clearly feel some of the memories in his mind rapidly fading and dissipating. Qin Yu was overjoyed. It was clear that this was because the barbarian bloodline inheritance mark was being removed. The abyssal Titan bloodline in his body suddenly became restless. But before it could erupt, it was kicked to the ground. He absolutely could not make the same mistake twice. He had already suffered a great loss, so he certainly could not allow the Titan bloodline to mess around. But Qin Yu had to admit that as his memories became blurry, he felt a bit of grief and resistance. But these small emotions were completely suppressed. He firmly believed that he had been affected by the barbarian mark and that it wasn't from his heart. This thing was simply terrifying. Luckily, he had acted quickly. If he had been any later, it would have been hard to say. His memories became increasingly faint. Just as Qin Yu felt that success was right in front of him, his mind suddenly trembled. Then, those blurry memories rapidly became clear. They were even firmer than before, as if they were deeply branded into his soul. Shwa! Qin Yu's eyes shot open, and he stared at the mysterious existence in front of him. But before he could question it, the other side had already screamed. It was sad, like a little girl who had been dragged under a bridge on a rainy day. It was simply moving. Qin Yu was stunned. The one who should be like, "This should be me, right? Why are you the one who looks like you've been defiled?" "Qin Yu, I've suffered a great loss. I've really suffered a great loss this time." He rubbed his eyebrows and took a deep breath to suppress his irritation. Qin Yu said, "What happened?" "What happened? You liar, you big liar. I suspect that all of this is your plot." He stomped his feet and shouted. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. "Look at my face. Do I look like a liar?" "Yes." "Qin Yu." Fine, it really was unreasonable. Even a powerful existence hidden in space and time couldn't block the female attribute of her. "What is going on? I'm very confused right now." He screamed. "The situation is that I've been tricked by you. Saving the barbarians has always been your own will and belief. Unless I kill you, there's no way to remove it." Qin Yu waved his hand. "Hold on, what do you mean?" "What I mean is that this is your destiny, and it is your own choice. I said that although the barbarians are a little stupid, it is impossible for them to find a foreign race to be their emperor for no reason." Qin Yu frowned, his eyes cloudy and uncertain. "You still don't understand? This means that you are the true emperor of the Berserkers. This is your destiny, and unless we kill you, it's impossible for us to resolve it." Bang! In his mind, something seemed to explode. Qin Yu was instantly enlightened. So this was fate. This was the first time he truly felt the trajectory of his own fate, and he discovered such a sorrowful truth. He could not help but fall into a daze. The Berserker Sovereign, he was the true Berserker Sovereign. Unless he died, he would never be able to shirk his responsibility. He sneered. "Do you understand now?" Qin Yu nodded numbly. Anyone who knew that they would face an incomparably miserable and despairing end in the future wouldn't be any better. He sneered again. "Don't play dumb. Now it's time to talk about how to compensate me. This time, I really suffered a great loss." Qin Yu looked up in a daze. "Just now I was just about to remove the mark, but I suddenly discovered that doing so was the same as taking your life. Between killing you and saving you, I chose the latter. The result was that a part of my aura was integrated into the mark, entangled with you in this karmic connection." As he spoke to her, he was filled with grief and indignation. He fiercely stared at Qin Yu. It seemed that he wished he could jump up and tear off a piece of his flesh. Qin Yu blinked, his eyes shining with a bright light. He looked at the mysterious existence in front of him. "Are you saying that you were also involved?" "Yes." He clenched his teeth, his small white teeth flashing with a cold light. "All of this is your responsibility. Qin Yu, you must take responsibility." Hearing these words, Qin Yu suddenly felt everything in front of him become clear. If he was alone, there was a high chance that he wouldn't be able to escape the tragic fate that was destined for him in the future. But if there was an additional mysterious and formidable existence in front of him, a mysterious existence hidden in space-time, then perhaps there would be a turning point? He lifted a hand and pressed it down, his voice filled with sincerity. "Take responsibility. I will definitely take responsibility. Please be at ease. I, Qin, will bear all the consequences of this matter." His tone changed. "However, you should be aware that the premise of all of this is that I must live. If I am killed, then you won't have anyone to ask for help from." He looked at Qin Yu, thought about it, and then nodded. That's right, this was indeed the case. Qin Yu couldn't die. If he died, wouldn't that mean he would suffer a loss for nothing? He absolutely couldn't do this sort of losing money transaction. Qin Yu coughed. "So, I want to understand a little bit. After you joined in, did the situation change? This is also to help me live a better life. I believe that wise and far-sighted sir will not hesitate to inform me." He sneered. "Don't take me for a fool. There is no such thing as a free lunch in this world. If you want to obtain information about me, then you must pay the price." Qin Yu was solemn. "Of course, everything will be done according to your wishes." There was no need to worry about too many debts, but there were also too many lice. Perhaps it was better to stir things up. In short, he could worry about the future in the future. He had to focus on the present first. He took a deep breath, his voice filled with grief and indignation. "With my aura, the Berserker bloodline mark in your body will be covered up." Qin Yu's eyes brightened. In other words, you, the new Berserker Sovereign, will become invisible. The humans won't be able to lock onto your aura, so they won't be able to directly attack you. Qin Yu was overjoyed. This was the best news he had heard today. If he wasn't chased down by the human cultivators, then being the Berserker Sovereign wasn't something he couldn't accept. Looking at Qin Yu's happy expression, he felt wronged. He felt as if he had jumped into a mud pit and had been lifted up by someone else. "Qin Yu, don't be happy too early. When you became the new sovereign, the human cultivators sensed it. Although your aura has disappeared and they can't lock onto you, they still know that the Berserkers have given birth to a new sovereign. The human cultivators will definitely do everything in their power to find you, kill you, and destroy the last of the Berserkers' destiny." As he spoke to her, his voice choked with sobs, as if he were about to cry. "And I will have to bear all of this in your place and resist all sorts of harm from the humans." Qin Yu bowed. Noble, benevolent, kind, and beautiful mysterious existence, please rest assured that I will do everything in my power to repay you." It was clear that this last description had the greatest effect. The sobs faded a little, but there was still resentment that was difficult to quell. A soul of the Emperor realm. This time it's real, and I'm not joking with you. I need the soul of an Emperor realm in order for me to withstand it. Otherwise, if worst comes to worst, I will just give up a part of my aura and sell you to the human cultivators. I believe that they will give me some benefits to express their gratitude. Chinyu said in a low voice, "Okay, I agree." The soul of an Emperor realm. Hiss. Just thinking about it made him feel cold sweat all over his body, as if he was about to freeze. I'm really inflated right now. I even dare to agree to such a condition without hesitation. But besides this, there was really nothing else he could do. Even if he wanted to deny it in the future, he had to first fool him. He would drag it out for as long as he could. If he really couldn't drag it out, then he would see what the situation was like. His eyes revealed scrutiny and suspicion. I feel that you agreed so quickly just to deal with me. Chinyu said, "Illusion, it's definitely an illusion. I will definitely do what I say. Isn't it just the soul of an Emperor realm? Just wait and see, sir. That's for the best. If you dare to lie to me, Chinyu, I promise that I will make you suffer." He turned and left. Chinyu opened his mouth and swallowed his words. Originally, he wanted to. He wanted to ask about some matters regarding human cultivators, but for now, it was better to forget about it. It wouldn't be too late to summon him when he was in a better mood. In any case, they were all in the same boat, and there would be plenty of communication in the future. The only thing that puzzled Chinyu was that he didn't want this palace lantern anymore. He had made such a big mistake and caused trouble for himself. He had no choice but to act as Chinyu's protective umbrella and invisibility cloak. If he opened his mouth and asked for it, Chinyu probably wouldn't be able to keep it. But he had left just like that. Was he muddled from anger, or was there another reason? Chinyu thought about it and felt that it was probably both. But keeping the palace lantern in his hands was of course a good thing. He didn't want to cause trouble for himself and had to satisfy his curiosity. Looking at the strange yet familiar hall, Chinyu sat on the Black Dragon Emperor's throne, took a deep breath, and then slowly exhaled. The things in this world were too bizarre and dreamy. When he was first suppressed and brought here, who would have thought that the situation would turn out like this? He had become the barbarian emperor. He had truly become the person who had to shoulder the fate of the barbarians. His head was a little dizzy. Chinyu raised his hand and rubbed his eyebrows. Although he was already certain in his heart and was forced to accept this matter, he still felt that it was like a dream. Space shook. It wasn't that the mysterious existence had returned, but that a half-living stone statue had appeared in front of the hall. Chinyu was startled. He suddenly remembered that he had already undone his changing state. But what surprised him was that the half-living stone statue didn't seem surprised at all. It only glanced at him before respectfully kneeling down. "Your Majesty, the intruder is too strong. We need your help." With a thought, Chinyu guessed the reason. This half-living stone statue in front of him clearly believed that the barbarian emperor had eaten him, which was why it was in this state. After all, his current aura was that of a genuine barbarian emperor. With the palace lantern as his backing, there was no doubt in the eyes of the barbarians. Chinyu took a deep breath and steadied his mind. He recalled the barbarian emperor's actions and leaned back on the Black Dragon Emperor's throne. He lightly said, "Okay." At this moment, Chinyu had entered the barbarian emperor state. He lifted a hand and pointed forward. As the new master of the imperial tomb, he could mobilize all of its strength with a single thought. For today, the previous barbarian emperor had made many preparations. But now, all of it had benefited Chinyu. The Western barbarian and Western barbarian cultivators who had entered the imperial tomb. Although they were strong, they still couldn't escape the fate of being suppressed. Even if there were many peak sovereign-level powerhouses among them, because the imperial tomb in front of them was a small divine kingdom. Within the divine kingdom, Qin who controlled the palace lantern, was an omnipotent god. Only an Emperor realm expert could forcefully open a domain and break the suppression of the divine kingdom. Otherwise, no one could resist. In the endless distance, the alarm gradually subsided. But in the great hall, everyone had a solemn expression. An old man in a white robe holding a divine staff raised his hand and flew into the air. His expression was heavy. Just now, the new barbarian emperor was born. He is the prophecy's greatest enemy of the human cultivation system. He is an existence that must be eliminated. Now his aura is hidden. We can't be sure what the new barbarian emperor has done. But there is one thing that is beyond doubt. We must find him and kill him. And the place where he appeared is in that dark land of sin. The old man in the white robe raised his divine staff. A terrifying power burst out from his body. Dazzling light burst out from the divine staff and condensed into a light pillar that shot up into the sky. Send my order. Mobilize all the power of the human race. Find the new barbarian emperor and kill him at all costs. Many stars appeared in the darkness. The starlight that fell from the sky condensed into shackles that trapped all the cultivators who had entered the mausoleum. Not only the people of the Western Barbarian, but the people of the Barbarian tribe, led by the leader of the Dark Knight tribe, were also suppressed. The half-alive stone statues stared at them with burning eyes. Saliva flowed from the corners of their mouths and dripped onto the ground. The way they looked at food was undoubtedly terrifying. It was also a powerful deterrent. Everyone's expression changed, and fear appeared in their eyes. Being bitten to death and eaten alive was naturally the most unacceptable ending for them. It was far more terrifying than death. Chapter 1504. Even though they were drooling and itching to pounce on him, the barbarians who were in the state of half-living stone statues still suppressed the desire in their hearts. No matter how much their gazes burned, they did not take a step closer, because as for how to deal with them, His Majesty the barbarian sovereign had given them an order. They were waiting for the voice in the hall. Looking through the door, one could vaguely see a figure sitting like a mountain on the throne of the black dragon deep in the hall. He lowered his head slightly as if he was thinking. An invisible pressure was released from his body like a tide, causing people to feel endless awe. The 5 peak rulers of the Western Wasteland, as well as the ambitious one-eyed leader of the Dark Knight tribe, were all filled with bitterness. They had thought that entering the mausoleum would be the chance for them to show off their skills and seize a good fortune to break through to the Emperor realm. But all of this was just a trap, and they were the real prey. All of their ambitions had turned into bubbles, being suppressed and captured by the barbarian sovereign. They couldn't see any hope of survival. But thinking that they couldn't even commit suicide and could only face an unknown fate, they couldn't help but feel even more sorrowful. But in reality, the new barbarian sovereign was also having a headache about how to deal with these people. Logically speaking, killing them would naturally be the simplest way to deal with it, but doing so had a great hidden danger. The Dark Knight tribe and the many barbarian powerhouses represented almost half of the top powerhouses of the barbarian race. If they were all killed, it was the same as crippling their own arms. After all, Qin was the new barbarian sovereign. Although he had to shoulder the responsibility, he didn't think he could lead the entire barbarian race to rise. He had to leave some helpers behind. The second point, which was also the most important point, was that if he killed the 5 peak rulers of the Western Wasteland, they would definitely retaliate crazily. Not to mention whether or not he was afraid. The most important thing was that Qin didn't want to expose himself too early because of this matter. The mysterious existence hiding in space and time had paid a great price to temporarily conceal Qin aura. Once he was locked on by human cultivators, they would do everything they could to kill him in the shortest time possible. So it was best if there was no conflict in the Western Wasteland. Since he couldn't kill them and locking them up wasn't realistic, he could only release them. But how to release it was a technical problem. What Qin Yu was considering right now was how to obtain the greatest benefits for himself in this matter. However, no matter how he thought about it, he felt that he was a mess, unable to come up with a plan that suited his needs. As Qin Yu was anxiously pulling at his hair, a fluctuation of strength suddenly arrived. Hum! The space trembled slightly, and an invisible barrier descended, isolating all senses inside and outside. In the eyes of the outside world, there were no changes to the Great Hall. The barbarian sovereign was still deep in thought, but he didn't know that this was just a fake image that was presented before their eyes. Qin Yu stood up and looked towards the hall. As space collapsed and a great sun appeared, his face lit up with pleasant surprise. After many years of cultivation, he had honed his acting skills to perfection. The so-called greeting people with a smile even when harboring murderous intent, the so-called remaining unfazed even in the face of an avalanche, and so on were all very simple things. But in front of it, Qin Yu didn't need any of this. You're finally willing to show your face. Hurry up and see if this thing is useful to you. With a wave of his hand, the palace lantern flew to him. The flames within it flourished and pulsed violently, as if it was suffering from epilepsy. It gave off the feeling that if it didn't calm down, it would immediately faint. Within the great sun, a figure appeared. It looked at the palace lantern and said, "It is a replica. The craftsmanship is a bit rough, but it is more comprehensive. I wonder what sort of character the barbarians produced in the past to be able to create something like this." Then there was nothing else. Qin Yu frowned. "That's it? I don't believe you. If this palace lantern is only at this level, it shouldn't be able to draw you here." The figure within the great sun was silent for several breaths of time. Then it nodded. "Yes, the reason I risked my life to come here today wasn't for this lantern. In fact, I must remind Master Qin Yu that the reason I remained silent before wasn't because it wasn't precious, but because there was an aura that made me dread it." Qin Yu instantly thought of that mysterious existence that didn't seem dignified at all in front of him. When the little blue lamp spoke of an aura that made it dread it, it was clearly referring to that person. His heart chilled, and he even felt some lingering fear. For the little blue lamp to treat him so cautiously and not dare to casually appear. He feared that person's strength was far greater than he had imagined. And no matter how he looked at it, Qin Yu's attitude towards him couldn't be considered respectful at all. If he really angered him, just thinking about the consequences made his scalp tingle. Calm down, don't panic. As long as he paid attention to his attitude in the future and didn't court death, then everything should be fine. After all, that mysterious existence had a high degree of tolerance towards him. The little blue lamp glanced at Qin Yu as if it could see through his thoughts. It suddenly said, "Master Qin Yu, although that person beside you doesn't treat you the same, I must remind you that the higher the degree of tolerance he has, the greater the benefits he seeks. In short, Master Qin Yu must be more careful. I have never been able to see through him. And the other one is that His Excellency Ruler. Her aura is also very strange. Master must also pay more attention to her and avoid contact with her as much as possible." Qin Yu felt as if he were about to turn to wood. A mysterious existence that hid in space-time wasn't enough, and now there was also the His Excellency Ruler. In truth, these two were currently Qin Yu's strongest trump cards. The former wasn't too bad because he hadn't had much contact with them, but the His Excellency Ruler had long since tangled up with Qin Yu. Perhaps it wouldn't be so simple to separate them. That wasn't right. Because of this matter of becoming the new Goliath sovereign, Qin Yu and the mysterious existence had already become grasshoppers on a rope. In other words, the little blue lamp's warning had come too late. Qin Yu rubbed his face and clenched his teeth. There are some things that can't be said ahead of time. The little blue lamp was silent. The figure in the great sun paused for several breaths of time and then slowly said, "I just never thought that Master's destiny would be so formidable." There was a deeper meaning in these words. Was it saying that all of this was because Qin Yu's life wasn't good and that he couldn't be blamed at all? With my hot temper, I really can't stand it. Qin Yu glared, but before he could speak, he was interrupted. I said before that although the Emperor Mausoleum has sealed away my aura, it is still a risk in the end, so I cannot stay here for too long. Let's talk about proper business first. How infuriating! But looking at the great sun and the solemn appearance of the little blue lamp, Qin Yu could only grit his teeth and swallow his anger. After all, no matter what, this was all for him to live a better life. As a man, he had to endure. Speak. The little blue lamp said, "The palace lantern is a replica, but the truth is that the handle of this lantern is the true treasure." His eyes fell and he revealed a look of praise. Originally, when Master's cultivation reached this step, he should have encountered a bottleneck, and it would be difficult for his strength to rise in a short period of time. But now that he has obtained this item, everything is possible. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. Continue. Within the great sun, the little blue lamp reached out a hand and grasped forwards. The palace lantern flew out on its own and fell into its hand. Its speed was fast, and it emitted a clear feeling of impatience. It casually picked up the lantern and tossed it to the side, allowing the great sun's flames to swallow it up. The palace lantern's handle was taken off, and the flames burned away all the decorations on its surface, as well as the things that had been added later on. As ashes fell to the ground, a long curved horn appeared in the little blue lamp's hand. As the handle of the palace lantern, what hung on it was actually a horn. It was a dazzling gold. It was the purest gold, and it exuded a vast and righteous aura, endless honor, unsurpassed dignity. As his eyes fell on the horn, he instinctively felt a deep sense of awe. The little blue lamp's voice sounded out, its deep voice filled with praise. The heavenly bull was the world's destiny spirit of the previous generation. After it died, this horn was the last thing it left in this world. With the heavenly bull's horn in hand, one can obtain the support of the world's destiny. They can turn calamities into blessings, and even in a hopeless situation, there will be light at the end of the tunnel. But what is most precious about it is that this horn contains a trace of the heavenly bull's bloodline. Qin Yu met the little blue lamp's gaze. What use does the heavenly bull's bloodline have? Endlessly growing and multiplying, turning the rotten into the miraculous, reversing all harm. The little blue lamp said, "Master Qin Yu, there is a great secret hidden within your body, and the origin of this secret should be the place where you descended. If you absorb the heavenly bull's bloodline and obtain the characteristics of the world's destiny spirit, then perhaps you can unravel all of this, and this was something that was destined a long, long time ago." Qin Yu frowned. He slowly said, "That race?" "That's right." The little blue lamp said, "When the world's destiny spirit alternates, this is a normal cycle of samsara. But after a variable appeared, everything was thrown into chaos. And that clan has also made a wrong decision. In the end, they will pay the price for their actions." Qin Yu said in a low voice, "Little blue lamp, just what do you know? Tell me everything." In the dark nothingness of the collapsing star, the great sun rapidly dimmed. The figure that appeared within turned illusory with it. "Master Qin Yu, I have never been able to see through your destiny. It is the same as that mysterious existence and the unfathomable ruler. So, I can only give you some vague hints, but I cannot accurately know everything. But the wheel of destiny has already gathered strength and is waiting to move. When you obtain the remaining heavenly bull's bloodline, perhaps you will be able to understand everything. As for the situation you are currently facing, perhaps Master can send this palace lamp out. With my strength fused into it, no one will be able to use the strength contained within unless they obtain my permission." The voice dissipated, the dark nothingness vanished, and the great sun vanished without a trace. The little blue lamp had left. Although it had said many things and given some plausible explanations, Qin Yu still felt that it was trying to avoid the truth. This fellow was definitely hiding something else and wasn't willing to speak of it. Qin Yu's own destiny, mysterious existence, his ruler. Qin Yu felt that there was more to his words. He took a deep breath and suppressed all his fluctuating emotions. Then he looked at the palace lamp and the heavenly bull horn that flew back in front of him. On the surface, the palace lamp didn't seem any different from before, but the connection between Qin Yu and it had become so weak that it was nearly undetectable. Besides himself, no one could discover that the palace lamp was still in Qin Yu's absolute control. This was clearly the little blue lamp's handiwork. Send it out? Give it to who? How? This fellow's way of speaking really deserved a spanking. He put it aside for now. Qin Yu's eyes fell on the heavenly bullhorn. The golden light on its surface became increasingly dazzling, as if it had been tempered by the little blue lamp and its strength had been thoroughly activated. Thump, thump. Within its chest, its heart violently beat. It seemed to sense something and began to transmit an intense desire. The abyssal Titan bloodline went berserk once more. But just like before it could make a splash, Qin Yu kicked it to the ground. He wanted to make his own decision on this matter and not passively accept it. That race, the destiny spirit, the secrets of his life. Even more hidden fog. Perhaps it really was time to investigate all of this. Bang! The palace doors were shut tight, cutting off all sight. Qin Yu lifted a hand and grasped the heavenly bullhorn. The moment his palm touched it, a brilliant golden light shined, as if it were cast from pure gold. The heavenly bullhorn that seemed like a sword shadow melted and disintegrated. It turned into a golden liquid that seeped into Qin Yu's flesh and blood. Then it emitted beams of golden light that submerged his entire body. Kacha! Kacha! This wasn't the sound of something breaking. Rather, it was like the sound of water freezing over at a low temperature. A golden eggshell gradually appeared, wrapping around Qin Yu.